In the veil between the seen and unseen worlds, there's a slumbering, wandering soul who, unbeknownst to him, becomes a vessel for all the evils of the Vampire Diaries / the original's world with time as he slumbers. The evil, though, eventually starts to overspill. Its vessel is starting to crack, like a glass being filled too much by boiling water. It does not know what to do, until the soul, subconsciously using the power of the world of dreams, seals the evil, in the mark representing it in his mind. The Mark of Cain. And as he does, his soul, filled to the brim with the evils of nature, drifts till he is reborn as a newborn child. He is once more a man made of flesh, blood, and bone. He is the third oldest child of the Mikaelsons. Vali Mikaelson, the boy king. Pairing is Vali x Tatia and Katerina / Katherine, though no Yuri. The Mark of Cain is the one from Supernatural where it makes the bearer virtually unkillable after dying and being revived as a demon by it, a knight of hell. It increases one's bloodlust also to Ripper levels, if not beyond it. This is a completely fictitious story, and nothing of it should be taken from it as reality. My beliefs are completely different. So, I condone no evil in the fiction. It is all for entertainment purposes only. Now enjoy. Hello everybody, Omni Sensei here with What If I Was Reborn as an Original Vampire with the Mark of Cain? Part 1. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it. The cries of a newborn filled the dimly lit chamber, echoing like a hymn of life. Esther clutched the edge of the birthing bed, her breathing shallow, her body trembling from the ordeal. Sweat slicked her brow, and her golden hair clung to her pale face. The midwife worked quickly, wiping the child clean and swaddling him in soft linen. Michael stood by the doorway, his arms crossed, his frame stiff with tension. His sharp blue eyes darted between his wife and the squirming bundle in the midwife's arms. For all his stoicism, the faintest flicker of hope softened the hard lines of his face. "A boy," the midwife whispered reverently, holding the infant out to his father. "Your third-born, my lord, strong and healthy." Michael took the baby with a careful reverence, as though cradling something sacred. The infant's tiny face was scrunched in protest, his fists clenched. Michael chuckled softly, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Vali," he murmured. "He will be called Vali." The name felt powerful, ancient. Michael looked down at his son, pride swelling in his chest. But as he shifted the swaddling cloth, his gaze froze. His breath hitched. There it was, a mark, red and sinuous, like the curling branches of a cursed tree. It sprawled across the boy's right forearm. The mark glimmered faintly in the flickering firelight, almost alive in its malevolence. As the midwife left them to give them their privacy, Esther sat upright, her exhaustion replaced by a chilling wave of dread. She was lost, afraid, and angry. "Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her eyes fixed on the mark, her heart plummeting. She could practically see the waves of evil radiating off the boy like smoke rising from a bonfire. Michael shook his head, dismissing her unspoken fear. "It's nothing," he said firmly, but his grip tightened on the child. Esther pushed herself upright, ignoring the lingering pain in her body. "It's not nothing. You see it. You feel it." Michael glared at her, his jaw tightening. "It is but a birthmark. It's a curse," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I've read the old texts, Michael. That feeling, that form, it is a mark of murder. He is a sign of death and destruction. It's a warning from nature." The baby stirred, his cries softening into an eerie silence. His tiny eyes, a piercing shade of gray, flickered open, meeting Esther's gaze. For a brief moment, she swore she saw something unnatural, a depth far too ancient for a newborn. Her blood ran cold. "Michael," she pleaded, her voice shaking, "we cannot keep him. He will bring ruin to our family. We have to dash." Michael stepped forward, his towering figure casting a long shadow over her. His face darkened, his expression carved from stone. Finish that thought, Esther, he said, his voice dangerously low. She flinched but forced herself to meet his eyes. We have to kill him, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Michael's face twisted in fury, and his knuckles whitened as he gripped the child closer to his chest. If you even think of harming him, Michael growled, his voice a venomous snarl, I will bury you myself. Do you understand me, Esther? Her breath hitched, her heart pounding in her chest. This was not the man she knew, the protector, the patriarch. This was something darker, more primal. Michael, she began, her voice barely audible. He's not just a child. He's our son, Michael roared, his voice shaking the walls of the chamber. Whatever curse you imagine is but a delusion. I will not hear another word of this. Esther's lips quivered, but she said nothing more. Michael's fury had made his stance clear, and she knew better than to push him further. But deep inside, her unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of her soul. The room fell silent, save for the crackling fire. Michael turned his back to her, shielding Vali as though the infant needed protection from his own mother. Esther stared at them, her heart torn between love and a growing, inescapable dread. In the stillness, she swore she heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the air like a ghost's breath. Kill it. Esther shuddered, her eyes darting to the shadows. But there was nothing there, only the haunting weight of a choice that could tear their family apart. Soon enough, the chamber felt suffocating, its air thick with unspoken tension. Esther sank back onto the bed, her hands trembling as she clutched the furs draped over her lap. She watched Michael pace the room with Vali, his heavy boots striking the stone floor like war drums. The baby had gone quiet, unnervingly so. His tiny hands occasionally flexed, his gray eyes staring into the dim firelight with a focus that seemed impossible for a newborn. Esther couldn't shake the sensation that he was listening, watching, waiting. Michael, she tried again, her voice softer, more pleading. Please, I'm begging you. At least let me consult the texts, seek guidance from the ancestors. No, Michael interrupted, his tone final, cutting through her words like a blade. He didn't look at her as he spoke, his attention locked on the child in his arms. We will not turn our son into some cautionary tale. The ancestors do not decide his fate. Ido. But you felt it, Esther pressed, her desperation spilling over. When you held him, you felt the darkness too, didn't you? Michael stopped pacing, his back to her, his broad shoulders tense. For a moment, silence reigned, and Esther thought perhaps she had broken through his stubbornness. But when he turned, his face was cold, unyielding. I felt the weight of a father's responsibility, he said evenly, though his voice betrayed a flicker of something deeper, something uncertain. And I will bear it, as I have borne everything else. He is my son, Esther, not a monster, not a curse. Esther bit her lip, the words she longed to say trapped behind the dam of her fear. She wanted to scream, to demand he listen, but the fire in Michael's eyes told her it would be futile. The baby let out a soft coo, breaking the tense silence. Michael glanced down at him, and his expression softened. He sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Vali as though he were the most fragile, precious thing in the world. Look at him, Michael murmured, his voice filled with a tenderness that caught Esther off guard. He is perfect. Esther's gaze fell on the mark again, the dark tendrils curling across Vali's pale skin. Perfect? No, she couldn't bring herself to agree. But when she looked into Michael's face, she saw a man unwilling to let go of his hope, unwilling to see the shadow hanging over their child. Michael, she whispered, her voice trembling. What if it isn't something we can control? What if he, her words faltered, her throat tightening. What if he destroys us? Michael's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. You underestimate me, Esther. You underestimate him. The baby stirred again, his tiny fingers brushing against Michael's hand. Michael smiled faintly, his thumb tracing the delicate curve of Vala's cheek. Whatever comes, Michael said, his voice low and steady. I will protect him. I will shape him into a warrior, a man who will carry our family's legacy. This mark, whatever it is, will not define him. He is my son, and I will not allow him to be anything less than extraordinary. Esther's chest ached, torn between love and dread. She wanted to believe him, to trust in his strength, but the firelight seemed to flicker ominously, casting Vala's shadow long and dark against the wall. "I pray you're right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The baby's gray eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment they locked gazes. Esther felt a chill seep into her bones, an inexplicable sense of foreboding that made her breath catch. Vala's lips curled into what could almost be mistaken for a smile, though it was far too knowing, far too deliberate for a newborn. Esther's heart raced, her instincts screaming. She tore her gaze away, clutching at the furs to steady herself. Michael rose, cradling Vali as he moved toward the door. "Rest, Esther," he said, his tone soft but commanding. "You've been through enough." "And what of him?" she asked, her voice tight. "I will keep him close," Michael replied without hesitation. "He is my son. He is safe with me." As the door closed behind them, the room plunged into silence. Esther sat in the dim light, her arms wrapping around herself as a cold, unshakable fear settled in her chest. She closed her eyes, but the image of Vala's piercing gray gaze burned behind her lids. The words she had heard earlier whispered again in her mind, clearer this time, though they were not her own. "Kill it." Tears slid down her cheeks, silent and unbidden. Esther knew one thing with certainty. The darkness she feared since she sold her daughter to her devil of a sister was already here. Her sins have called upon it, and it has come in the form of her own flesh and blood. It felt like an earthquake. The Viking village where the Mikaelsons lived was peaceful until the star of dawn rose, and he appeared. The stillness of the early morning air shattered with the arrival of the man who was said to embody death itself. He was even more majestic than before, his presence as consuming as a wildfire. The earth seemed to tremble beneath the deliberate, heavy steps of his mighty steed, the Black King. The beast's dark mane whipped like a banner of chaos, its fiery eyes a reflection of its master's unrelenting spirit. As he arrived, he from above looked down at her with those dark eyes, blazing with desire and pride. They seemed to burn straight into her soul, leaving her bare, vulnerable, and utterly captivated. Pride and power radiated off him, engulfing her in the same way they had that night so long ago. She had just recently arrived in this village after her own was conquered by him. The memories of that day were seared into her mind like scars. She should be angry. No, furious. He had killed them all. He had slain so many of their warriors who had dared to stand against him, painting the earth red with their blood. She had seen him amidst the chaos, drenched in the crimson life of her people, his expression unreadable yet unyielding. When asked what he wanted, why he had committed such slaughter, his words had echoed like the toll of a bell over the silence of the dead. Only by death can a true warrior be defeated. Only by death is a true victor crowned. What I did to your warriors was a gift, the gift of the embrace of death. They are now truly kings among men. They faced death with courage. The same cannot be said about me. I've yet to look death in the face and still charge forward. I'm still deprived of a worthy opponent. As he said these words, his voice dropped into something heavier, darker, a note of sorrow that betrayed a side of him she could not comprehend. He looked sad, longing. It was an emotion that didn't belong on the face of a monster. She knew it was wrong, yet her heart ached in response to that flicker of vulnerability, even as he turned his back on them and rode away, his warriors following like wolves in a shadow. He had no interest in their food or their women. All he desired was to face an opponent worthy of his best for the first time in his life. Yet once again, it seemed he had failed. The village, broken and battered, stood at crossroads. Their warriors were dead, their defenses shattered. They had no way to fend off raiders or rivals who would come for their food, their land, their daughters. Swallowing their pride, they approached him. Though he had taken so much from them, they asked to follow him, to serve him. The elders cursed his name even as they bowed before him. But survival overruled vengeance. And so, she found herself here, living among the people who once followed her, now turned to him. It was his kingdom now. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to feel the rage and fury that her aunt wore like armor. But every time she tried, she saw those sorrow-filled eyes, those eyes that longed not for glory, but challenge. To support herself in this new life, she took up the same work she had done in her old village, knitting clothes for the warriors. She worked with silent diligence, her hands busy, but her thoughts never far from him. There he was again, leaning against the mighty white oak tree at the village's heart. His posture was casual, almost lazy, but there was nothing relaxed about him. His sharp gaze swept over the horizon, yet she sensed he wasn't watching for threats. No, he was lost in thought, a mind so deep she could not fathom it. What haunted him? What drove him to such violence, to such longing? Unbeknownst to her, a young warrior watched her watching him. Bjorn, hot-blooded and reckless, was captivated by her beauty, but seethed with jealousy. Her attention was wholly fixed on Vali, the man they called Mjolnir for his unrelenting might. Bjorn's hand gripped the hilt of his sword as anger consumed him. He could not bear her gaze lingering on the man he despised. In a moment of blind fury, he stood and approached the mighty warrior. Drawing his blade, he extended it toward him. Mighty Mjolnir, I challenge you for your place as head of the warriors, as you did long ago against your own father. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the air seemed to still as everyone waited for Vala's reaction. Vala's eyes opened, cold as the icy fjords. Bjorn, you dare challenge me to a home gang? His voice was laced with frost, each word a dagger of ice that sent shivers through all who heard it. Bjorn faltered, his confidence wavering. But when he saw where Vala's gaze had shifted to Tatia, standing silent among the crowd, his fury reignited. Idare, and I dare even more. When I win, I will have your head. Vala stood, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the younger warrior. He leaned down, bringing his neck close to the tip of Bjorn's blade. The faint scent of iron filled the air as blood beaded from a shallow cut. A slow, menacing smirk spread across his face. Very well, I accept, but when I win, I will rip out your heart. Bjorn's lips tightened, and he nodded, his pride outweighing his sense. The crowd shifted toward the center of the village, murmurs spreading as they prepared for the duel. Bjorn, you can still back out. Don't be a fool. Shut up, Aim. I am a warrior, and I have my pride. How dare you even suggest I bring dishonor upon myself and our family? Aim gritted his teeth and clenched his fists until they bled. His brother was a fool. How could he not see that he was a lamb going to the slaughter? As Vali and Bjorn were given the signal, Bjorn drew his sword and began to circle Vali. But as he did, the Mikaelson did not even move to draw his own. What are you doing? Where is your weapon? Bjorn asked. Vali ignored him. His gaze focused on one person, who intrigued him greatly. Bjorn was greatly angered by this. How dare he mock him? How dare he ignore him? And look at the woman he desired. I asked you, where is your weapon, Mjolnir? I will not fight a man unarmed. Bjorn yelled, everyone tense, curious to see what Vali would do. Though Michael, his father, who already has lost years ago to his son, was only bored. How long was his son going to play with his food? If it was him, there he would have already put the fool out of his misery. Vala, for the first time since the battle began, looked directly Bjorn in the eyes and said with a smirk on his face, what are you waiting for? Your move. Your chance at the best is right in front of you. Bjorn, angered, clenched the hilt of his blade. Suit yourself. But when you are dead, do not complain in Valhalla that I was unfair to you, and charge forward. Fool, Vali whispered as he ducked, and with a sweeping kick, bent Bjorn's leg and made him roar in agony. As Bjorn was falling over, the Mikaelson within human speed rose up and broke his fall, gripping his neck. Little Bjorn, little warrior, little fool, little bull weevil who delights in making noise and pretending he is important and dangerous. You really thought you could defeat me? You really thought you could take my place? Vala stated as he viciously strengthened his grip around Bjorn's neck, who continued to choke. Aim, who saw this, could see his brother's death was near and couldn't bear the thought of it. Against all he's learned about honor, he draws his sword and with a roar charges toward Vali. Everyone, too shocked to react, couldn't stop him, though as his sword drew near the mighty Mjolnir, he with one hand caught it and broke it. Everyone, even Michael, was baffled. Vali just broke a sword with his bare hands. Many had already seen him sweep through the battlefield with inhuman might, yet none was ever truly close enough to witness his absurdity. And so, without even giving another moment to aim, to contemplate the foolishness he's just committed, Vali grips him by the neck and with a mighty clench breaks it while Bjorn could only choke and watch. Little Bjorn, do you see now what your arrogance has caused you? Not only your own death, but your older brother's as well, Vala stated, as he with inhuman strength punched into Bjorn's chest and gripped his heart, while Bjorn's eyes could only widen as he tried to scream in agony. Remember what I promised? Vali asked as he tightened his grip and then ripped it out for all to see. The women, save Tatia, turned away from the brutal sight, while the warriors were shocked at the strength of the head of warriors. As Bjorn was dying, the monster left him a few parting words. Your arrogance brought upon this fate. This path was of your own choosing. Take that knowledge with you to hell. And he crushed his heart in front of his eyes. He let Bjorn's heartless corpse fall to the ground, as he then turned his gaze to Tatia once more, with her gripping her own arms and shivering at those eyes that stripped her bare to her very bones. As she did, a glint appeared in them, causing Vala to smirk as leaned down, cleaning his bloodied hand with Bjorn's clothing, walking away. He found something truly interesting later that night as Tatia heard. Knocking on her door, she immediately ran and brought out a knife, which she hid behind her back as she then, through a small hole in the door, looked through to see who was visiting her this late at night. And when she saw him, she opened the door. As she did, he leaned against the door frame and looked at her with curiosity. Why did you open the door? He asked her. Why let him, a man, into her home this late at night? There is no point in not doing so, Lord Vali. If you truly want to come in, a measly door could not stop you, especially not after what I saw you do today. It would only make things more difficult for me afterward if I have to replace the door. She saw him smirk. Smart woman. Now will you invite me in? He asked, and she did, but still held the knife hidden behind her back. Yes, he had inhuman strength, but she doubted he would not die from a knife to the heart. He is still but a man, not a god. Why have you come here, my lord? She asked him, keeping her tone steady, not wishing to be lost in those intense eyes of his. He remained silent for a moment, until he approached her even more, till her back was against the wall. She didn't wait for a second longer as she attacked him with the knife and stabbed it in his chest, but as she did, the knife broke, and she stood there agape. How was that possible? Why? You are a man, not a god. Vala gently cupped her chin and raised her eyes to meet his. Indeed, I am not a god. I do not believe in the existence of the gods. He refused to worship creatures below him. But I've been called many times a demon or a devil. Maybe that is what I am. But I'm not here to discuss my existence, Tatia Petrova, the monster said. Then what are you here for, monster? She responded, with defiance in her eyes, and it only made the monster's grin widen. I have come to collect you, he told her. From the first look I could see it. You and I are the same. You love the sight of blood. You have violence in your soul, he said, with a monstrous smile on his face. She looked away. No, that's Dash, but Vali forced her gaze towards him. Don't deny it. I could see it in your eyes when I ripped Bjorn's heart out. You try to act like an innocent flower in a garden, but are a thorny rose that loves seeing men die for you. She couldn't deny it, angering her ever the more. How dare he judge her? How dare he do this to her? She with all her rage kissed him, pouring all her frustration, lust, and hatred towards him into it. Vali smirked inside the kiss as he and her tongue battled for dominance. He wrapped his arm around her and brought her closer as she gripped his clothes, digging her nails into his back, trying to pierce his skin, but he could only laugh. He dragged her to her bed and threw her on it. As she slightly got back up, she glared at him, but then stood agape as Vali ripped away his shirt and crawled onto the bed. She, at the sight, gave him a vicious smirk and embraced him. The Mikaelson estate in the north, surrounded by towering pine forests and windswept mountains, was waking to another bitterly cold Viking morning. The smell of wood smoke lingered in the air, mixing with the scents of freshly baked bread and the faint metallic tang of iron from the blacksmith's forge. Inside, the great hall was alive with the sounds of preparation, servants bustling about, warriors sharpening their axes, and the steady hum of life moving forward. Vali sat at the long wooden table, his fingers wrapped tightly around a mug of warm ale. His dark hair fell over his face as he stared at the fire in the hearth, lost in thought. Despite the warmth of the flames, there was a chill in the air around him. The tension in the room weighed heavy on his chest, the same weight he'd felt ever since he could remember. His heart beat steadily, but his thoughts were filled with the thrill of violence, the anticipation of blood. He stole a glance at the table's other occupants. Michael, his father, Elijah, his younger brother by a year, Niklaus, his younger brother by 5 years, Cole, the second youngest, his younger by 7 years, and Finn, the eldest, the one who had always seemed the most distant. They were all there, but none of them seemed truly present, not in the way Vali would have preferred them to be. Niklaus, ever the spirited one, sat at the edge of the table, his wide grin lighting up the room with an energy that contrasted sharply with the brooding silence of the others. His gaze flickered between Vali and the group, but there was a restlessness in his eyes that always pulled him toward mischief. Elijah, the ever-responsible brother, sat closer to their father. His demeanor was calm, as always, but Vali could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. His younger brother was dutiful, following the path set for him, and yet there was something quietly defiant about him, an undercurrent that Vali could never quite figure out. But it was Finn who occupied Vali's thoughts the most. Finn, with his cold eyes and distant expression, stood by the window, looking out at the gray sky. It was impossible to miss the quiet disdain Finn held toward him, the resentment that had grown over the years, despite all the attempts to patch things over. Despite them once being so close, they were practically inseparable. At least, that was until their mother's poison started to be bled into his ears. Vali could feel it now, the invisible rift between them. Since the day Vali was born, since the day he had come into this world bearing that mark, cursed, tainted, according to their mother, Finn, who had been warm to him, slowly began to grow colder. And now, as Vali looked across the room, he couldn't help but wonder if that gap between them could ever be bridged. But truth was, Vali didn't care about his mother's words. Her influence on Finn, the constant attempts at driving wedges between him and his family, the constant attempts on his life through curses and poison that no one noticed, but he, not anymore at least, the guilt he had once felt for the blood he spilled, for his mother's hatred, the terror that had gnawed at him as he wondered if she was right and he was destined to be a monster, was long gone. The mark no longer shamed him. If anything, it was a part of him he had come to embrace. The rush of power, the pleasure that surged through his veins with every kill, was more intoxicating than anything he had ever known. With each life taken, the mark seemed to whisper to him, urging him to take more, to spill more blood, to feel the world tremble beneath his hands. And Vali had learned to listen. He had learned to savor it. There was no guilt anymore. No hesitation. His family might see him as a shadow, a monster in their midst, but Vali knew better. He was alive in a way they could never understand. The others were content to follow the rules of civilization, to play their parts in the great game of survival. But Vali had tasted something beyond that, something pure and savage, and he would never go back. Michael's voice cut through the stillness, snapping Vali back to the present. Vali, what are your thoughts on the raid in the north? The clans are growing restless. They've been gathering more warriors. Do you think we can strike before winter sets in? Vali looked up from the fire, forced to pull his mind back to the task at hand. His father's gaze was firm, expectant. I think we should move swiftly, Vali replied, his voice steady, even as a slight smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He felt the old rush stirring in his chest, the anticipation of the bloodshed to come. The weather holds for now, but if we wait, we'll be caught in the snow. We should strike while we have the element of surprise. Cole grinned widely, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Now, that's the spirit. I've been itching for a fight. Elijah, ever the voice of caution, nodded thoughtfully. We need to be careful, though. The northern clans are known for their strength. They'll retaliate fiercely. I'll deal with them, Vali interjected, his voice low, the thrill of battle already thrumming in his veins. The weight of his mark, the pull of violence, was already beginning to draw him in. He could almost taste the blood on the wind. Let's make them fear us. Finn, who had been silent until now, gave a brief glance in Vala's direction, his face unreadable. The disdain was there. Vala could feel it, but Finn said nothing. Nothing at all. Vala's smile flickered. It had always been that way, hadn't it? Finn had never been able to hide his distaste, and yet he couldn't bring himself to openly confront Vali, either. Vala was too far gone. The mark had already claimed him. Finn could never understand that, never see the allure of it. But Vala didn't need Finn's approval. He didn't need anyone's approval. The bloodlust was his, and it made him powerful. It made him something his brothers could never be. Michael looked at him sharply, his gaze intense. I expect you to lead the vanguard, Vali. Precision. No mistakes. Vala's chest tightened with anticipation. Of course, father, he said with a grin. Leading the vanguard meant being at the front of the battle. It meant he could drink his fill of blood, savor the carnage without anyone getting in his way. His bloodlust would run wild, and he would embrace it. As he turned to leave the hall, he cast another glance at Finn. The eldest brother was still staring out the window, his posture stiff and unyielding. The distance between them felt endless. But Vala didn't care. He didn't care if Finn hated him. For once, he didn't feel the sting of rejection. The mark had taken that away. All that was left was the burning hunger, the longing for the rush of power, for the high that only blood could give him. And as Vala left the hall, the cold air biting at his skin, he couldn't help but wonder how long before the world would fall beneath his hands. The battlefield stretched before them like a canvas waiting to be painted with blood. The sun had barely risen, casting a cold light over the snow-covered earth, its pale rays gleaming off the steel of the warriors' weapons. The air was thick with the scent of iron, sweat, and anticipation. The northern clans were ready for battle, armed and roaring, prepared to defend their land with everything they had. And the Mikaelsons were prepared to bring hell to their doorstep. Vala stood at the front of the line, his heart pounding with the thrill of it all. His blood stirred, his mark pulsing faintly beneath his skin, urging him forward, urging him to spill more. His hands tightened around the hilt of his axe, and his smile was one of pure, unrestrained delight. This was what he was born for. This was where he felt alive. The battlefield was his playground, and every swing of his weapon, every death he dealt, was another brushstroke on the canvas of carnage he was painting. Finn, standing a few paces behind, was focused on the chaos unfolding in front of him. His jaw was set tight, his eyes cold. He watched as Vala charged forward, his movements fluid, precise, deadly. The way Vala moved was almost effortless. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, a man born to kill. But it wasn't just his skill with a blade that struck Finn. It was the expression on Vala's face. One of pure pleasure, a dark ecstasy that Finn couldn't understand. Each swing of his axe, each warrior he brought down, seemed to fuel him further. Vala didn't just fight for survival. He fought for the joy of it, for the intoxication of death. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no regret, just a sickening joy that made Finn's stomach churn. Still, as much as Finn despised what Vali had become, a part of him couldn't deny the deep, buried affection for his brother. Finn had always been the one to carry the weight of responsibility, the one who had been told to lead with honor and dignity. And yet, beneath all the resentment he felt, he remembered the good times, the laughter, the quiet moments before the darkness had fully taken hold. Finn's gaze lingered on Vali, but his thoughts twisted painfully. I hate you for what you become, but I still love you. I don't know how to reconcile that. Finn's breath hitched. The old poison of their mother's words still echoed in his mind. He is cursed, Finn. You cannot trust him. The mark has claimed him fully. He is lost to you. But deep inside, Finn's heart ached with something more than hatred. A part of him still longed to save his brother, even if he didn't know how. The bond they shared was not so easily broken, for they were close once when they were children. So, no matter how much Finn tried to convince himself otherwise, that love remained. Elijah, ever the voice of caution, stood with Cole, watching the chaos unfold before them. He wasn't as repulsed by Vala's savagery as Finn, but it disturbed him nevertheless. His eyes were filled with concern, his thoughts racing as he calculated the risks, the losses. There was a part of him that had always hoped for Vala to pull back from the abyss, to find balance. But the more he saw his brother embrace the bloodlust, the more the fear gripped him. Elijah feared that the man Vali was becoming might one day be beyond saving. But then, even through his worry, Elijah found himself torn. He did care. That bond between brothers, it still existed, even now. And while the warrior in him understood the need for strength in their world, the brother in him still hoped to see Vali return to them, to reclaim the man he had once been. Cole's voice broke through his reverie, a sharp laugh leaving his lips. Look at him, Elijah. Our brother's like a wild beast unleashed. It's both terrifying and impressive. I must admit, I've always thought he'd be more than but a fighter, but I never imagined he would embody this madness so completely. Elijah shot Cole a disapproving glance. It's not madness, Cole. It's danger. And I fear for him. If he continues down this path, there may be no coming back. Cole's eyes softened for a brief moment, a rare flicker of understanding passing through them. He might have enjoyed the chaos and the bloodshed, but even Cole wasn't blind to the toll it took on their brother. I don't know, Elijah. Maybe this is who he was always meant to be. He thrives in it. Look at him. Do you truly wish to deprive him of what he enjoys? But there was more to Cole's words than the casual, playful tone he so often adopted. Cole's heart ached for Vali, just as Elijah's did. Even Cole, the one who had always been seen as the most carefree and distant, could feel the weight of what was happening to their brother. They had all felt it, the growing chasm between them and Vali, a distance that had only deepened with the passage of time. He's our brother, Elijah. Even when he's like this, he's still our brother. These words were unspoken, yet Elijah could see they were what Cole really meant to say, that they should accept him no matter what. Michael watched from the rear of the battlefield, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. He was proud of Vali, yes, but that pride was tempered by a colder, more distant understanding of what his son was becoming. Vali was strong, there was no doubt of that, but his embrace of the bloodlust troubled Michael deeply. He had always expected greatness from his sons, but this unbridled hunger, was something he couldn't reconcile. And yet, even as he watched Vali carve his way through the enemy ranks, a flash of something deeper crossed Michael's mind. I'm proud of him, yes, but I also fear for him, for what he's becoming, for what he might lose in the process. The patriarch of the Mikaelson family still, behind his pride and his son's strength, could not ignore the warning words of his wife echo through his mind, and feared that one day he may lose his beloved son. The complexity of his feelings left Michael with a bitter taste. He had always been the one to push them toward strength, to teach them the ways of warriors, but now he found himself standing at the edge of something much he couldn't control. In the midst of the slaughter, Michael's thoughts drifted briefly to Klaus, his eyes seeking the figure of his youngest son. Klaus was still at the rear, far from the bloodshed, his posture stiff with uncertainty. Klaus, the one who had always been different, the one who wasn't consumed by the bloodlust. Michael had always feared this softness in Klaus, his reluctance to embrace what it meant to be a Mikaelson. But something in his chest twisted, something unfamiliar and almost painful when he saw his youngest son's pained expression. Niklaus wasn't a killer, not like Vali. But was that really a weakness? Michael tried to ignore the thought, but it lingered, uncomfortable. Was Klaus weaker for not sharing his brother's hunger for war? Or was it possible that Klaus, in his own way, was the strongest of them all? He did not truly know. Both Vali and Niklaus were the extremes of the two sides. Vali was his strongest son. He had everything one needed to be able to survive in this world. But that was it. Survival was all he was capable of, for love of anything but battle, save his family, wasn't something he noticed in his son's heart, and that saddened him. To thrive, one also needed peace, but Vali seemed only to be at peace when the scythe of death was around his neck. He had no other thing that could bring him peace outside of the battlefield. Niklaus, though, was everything Michael feared in a child of his after his beloved Freya was lost to him. He did not have the aggression, the ruthlessness necessary to survive in this cruel world. He was soft, just like Freya was. He reminded him of her the most, and that is why in some ways he cared for him the most out of their children. He tried to teach him the path of a warrior through training, sparring, hunting, yet nothing worked. His gentle nature always overcame any attempt at directing it away from those undeserving of it, and he decided to opt for cruelty. Be rougher with him in sparring matches, crueler in his words. Beat him even. Have him at least hate something, even if at him, so that he'll gain the strength necessary to be able to defend himself. Yet still it did not work. Nothing ever worked. Michael's frustration at the remembrance nearly reached its peak, and so before he lashed out at Klaus, he turned his gaze back towards his cruelest son. As the battle raged on, Vali's face twisted into a cruel grin. He was unstoppable, a force of nature, and nothing could stand in his way. Suddenly, though, as he cut down 3 more warriors in a single circular swing, a wall of fire rose up like an angry wave, swallowing the air between the 2 opposing sides. The heat was immediate and suffocating, crackling with magical power. The northern clans had summoned witches to the battlefield. A hush fell over the warriors for a brief moment as the flames roared high into the sky. It wasn't just the fire that had everyone on edge. It was the unspoken agreement that had always existed among the people of the region. No witches on the battlefield. Ever. It had been a rule, a sacred pact, passed down through the ages. To summon witches was to dishonor the very nature of combat. It was a battle for warriors, not for spells and sorcery. Michael, at the sight of the wall of fire, narrowed his eyes. His voice rang out, loud and commanding. Fall back. Fall back now. Elijah, Cole, and Niklaus obeyed without hesitation, retreating swiftly. They knew better than to challenge their father's orders. They understood that they were fighting not just against warriors, but now, against the very forces that made a man's heart tremble. But Vali stood still, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the wall of flames, his chest heaving with adrenaline. The heat seared his skin, a welcome burn, a reminder of the power he carried within him, the power that the Mark had gifted him. He could feel its presence pulsing beneath his skin, stronger than ever, urging him forward. With a savage grin, Vali growled, "A wall of fire? Really? You think I fear fire? Well, my very soul burns brighter and hotter than the flames of Surt for himself." He threw himself forward, charging into the flames with all the reckless abandon of storm. His body absorbed the heat as if the Mark protected him, though it burned him slightly, the flesh on his arms and face beginning to smolder. But Vali didn't care. The pain was nothing, a mere spark in comparison to the hunger inside him. He reveled in the sensation, letting the fire lick at him, feeling it deepen his thirst for violence. It only made him stronger. The northern clan's witches stood at the heart of the fire, cackling in dark glee as they watched Vali's approach. Their power was palpable, their magic wild and untamed, but Vali was something else entirely. He was an unstoppable force, a creature born from the very blood of war. He barreled through the fire like an animal unleashed, each step a fury of rage. His axes cleaved through the first wave of warriors, their cries mixing with the roaring fire, the sound like music to his ears. He could hear the witches chanting, feel the magic swirling around them, but it only spurred him on. Vali's eyes burned with a fire of their own, his teeth bared in a feral grin. From the edge of the battlefield, the leader of the northern clans watched in wicked satisfaction. A tall, imposing man with dark eyes. He had seen the flames engulfing the battlefield and knew that Vali, the cursed son, was charging headlong into their trap. His lips curled into a cruel smile as he spoke to his followers. "It is no tarnish to our honor if there is no one left to speak of it," he said, his voice cold and calculating. Let them come. Let them fight against our magic. We will show them how a battle truly ends. The witch's magic swirled stronger as they summoned fire, ice, and shadows, but Vali surged forward with renewed strength, his savage grin never fading. Each swing of his axe felt more exhilarating than the last as his enemies fell before him. He reveled in the carnage, the blood spilling beneath his feet, his senses heightened, and the thrill of the kill consuming him entirely. His brothers, Elijah, Cole, and Niklaus, watched in horror and disbelief as Vali tore through the battlefield, uncaring of the flames that seared his skin. They had never seen him like this, not with such abandon, such joy in the destruction. It unsettled them, though they would never show it. This was a side of Vali they had always feared, a side that seemed to embrace the darkness within him more than ever, without hesitation. Elijah's eyes were filled with concern, his mind racing. Father was right to order the retreat, he muttered, but the words were hollow, drowned out by the madness of battle. Even he, the strategist, could not deny the terror that gripped his heart at the sight of Vali. Cole's expression was unreadable, his gaze flickering between the destruction and his father, as if searching for the right course of action. He had always been the one to follow his instincts, but even he knew there was something deeply unsettling about Vali's slaughter. Michael's face was cold and stern, his grip on his axe tightening as he watched his son push forward. Part of him wanted to order Vali to fall back, to stop the madness, but he knew it was useless. Vali was too far gone now. There was no turning back for him. The mark had taken hold of him completely, and Michael knew, deep down, that it was something he could never control. As Vali cut down another group of warriors, his body covered in blood and ash, he didn't pause for a breath. The fire, the magic, the blood, it all fed into the hunger that burned within him. It was no longer about the battle. It was about the thrill of the kill, the rush of power that coursed through his veins. Vali had become something else entirely, and no wall of fire, no witch's spell could stop him now. Fear me, for I am the death you invited. Vali roared with wild abandon, his voice echoing over the battlefield, a dark proclamation that seemed to carry the very weight of the world's violence. His laugh followed, a terrifying, manic sound, ringing with the thrill of slaughter. His body, scorched by the flames and riddled with the sharp sting of cuts, healed rapidly, the mark driving him forward, its power surging through his veins like fire. And yet, unknown to all, somewhere beneath the bloodlust, beneath the haze of violence, there was a flicker of something more. As the battle raged on and Vali continued his rampage, a momentary pause came over him. He stood amidst the flames and bodies, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, his eyes wild, but then his gaze flickered. In the distance, he saw his family retreating, pulling back from the wall of fire. At first, he thought they abandoned him, to which he felt hurt, but also acceptance, since he expected it. Yet he was proven wrong, for as he looked closer, their faces were tense, filled with worry, fear, and something deeper, something that stirred in Vali's chest. They still care. His brothers, despite their horror, had not abandoned him. Elijah stood at the forefront, his usually composed face betraying a rare crack of unease. Cole's expression was guarded, but his wide eyes and clenched fists spoke volumes. And Finn, lingering at the rear, wore a mask of simmering resentment. Yet his gaze never left Vali, a thread of reluctant connection holding fast even now. He, through the years, thought they had began to abandon him as he let go of his pain, of keeping his bloodlust at bay, and began going to raiding towns and villages all on his own, without true need for it like it was accustomed. But it seems he had been wrong. He did not know what to make of this truth, and that both confused and terrified him. They still love me. Vali's grin faltered, just for a moment, before he snapped back into his bloodlust-driven state. The mark surged within him, drowning out his fleeting thoughts of family, of love, of control. The bloodlust overtook him again, and with a roar, he surged forward into the thick of the fighting, as unstoppable as ever. Amidst the roaring chaos, Vali fought like a wild beast unleashed. His axes cleaved, through warriors and witches alike, their bodies falling like broken trees beneath the force of his onslaught. The wall of fire flickered and twisted, crackling with magic, but the heat no longer fazed him. Nothing mattered except the blood rushing in his veins, the intoxicating rhythm of battle. Yet in the swirling carnage, the witches' magic grew stronger. The northern clans had placed their trust in their power, and their leader stood at the heart of it, a tall man with jet black hair and eyes like midnight, casting spells that shaped the very battlefield. His followers, both male and female, cloaked in black robes, chanted in unison, their voices a haunting melody that vibrated with ancient power. Vala's eyes narrowed as he barreled through the smoke and fire, his senses heightened by the mark. He could feel them, those who were pulling the strings from behind the flames. The witches, they stood at the center of this madness, their power intoxicating, and they had to be stopped. With a savage roar, Vali cut through the last of the enemies standing between him and the leader. The witches scattered, their magic swirling around them like a deadly storm. Vali didn't slow, his gaze locked onto the leader, the one whose cruel smile spoke of his belief in victory, of his faith that no warrior, no monster, could stand against the power they had summoned. But Vali wasn't a man. He was a storm. He cut down the first of the witches who tried to stop him with a fiery blast, his axe slashing through her in an instant. The air was thick with the scent of burning flesh and the acrid sting of magic. The others tried to hold their ground, but they were no match for the rage burning within Vali. Finally, the leader stood before him, a wicked grin still curling on his lips. The witch leader raised his arms, summoning dark tendrils of magic to encircle him. "You think you can stop me, cursed one?" he sneered, his voice laced with mockery. "You think you can kill a force of nature?" Vali didn't hesitate. He didn't care for the leader's words, his magic, or his arrogance. He swung his axe with a roar, cutting through the air as if it were butter. The first blow struck the witch leader's arm, and the dark tendrils faltered for a brief moment. The leader's expression turned to one of surprise, but it was too late. The second strike was a clean blow to his neck, severing his head from his body. The leader's eyes widened in shock, but Vali didn't care. The head hit the ground with a sickening thud, and with it, the magic that had been swirling around the battlefield faltered. The fire and ice that had once roared in defiance flickered and died, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The warriors, the witches, even the Mikaelsons, paused to take in the victory. Vali stood there, breathing heavily, his chest heaving with adrenaline and bloodlust. The mark beneath his skin pulsed, still hungry, but the battle had ended. With a wild, victorious grin, Vali raised his axe high, blood dripping from the blade. He turned to face his brothers, Elijah, Cole, Niklaus, and Finn. Standing at the edge of the battlefield, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, awe, and wariness. "I told you," Vali shouted over the field, his voice full of dark amusement. "No one can stand against me." His brothers were silent for a moment, watching him with a mix of emotions. But it was Finn who finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "You've won, Vali, but at what cost?" Vali's grin faltered, but only for a moment. He wasn't here to answer to Finn. He wasn't here to explain himself. He was here to revel in the victory, the blood, the power, the rush. The rest of them could decide what to do with their victory. He didn't care. He turned his gaze to the remaining warriors, those who had witnessed the fall of their witch leader. Their fear was palpable. Vali reveled in it, the echo of his roar filling the battlefield as he raised his axe once more, his voice carrying like a dark proclamation. "We have won this day," Vali declared, his voice carrying far and wide. "Let the world tremble. Let them know that the Mikaelsons are the storm that can never be stopped." As the remaining warriors dropped their weapons, surrendering to the weight of their defeat, Vali's grin returned. His brothers were still watching him, but now there was no hesitation in his movements. The bloodlust had won, and he had proven to himself and to them that he was more than just the cursed son. He was the storm, and no one could stand against him. The battle was won, but for Vali, The war had only just begun. His family, his brothers, still loved him, no matter how far he'd fallen. And that, deep down, was the victory that mattered most. Physical description. Vali stood at an imposing 6 feet 5 inches, his broad shoulders and lean, muscular frame giving him the air of a warrior forged in battle. His slightly wavy, jet black hair fell just past his ears, framing a chiseled face marked by a sharp jawline and high cheekbones. Chocolate brown eyes, warm yet shadowed by something unspoken, flickered with an intensity that could unsettle or captivate. He was clad in Viking-era attire, a long, woolen tunic in muted earth tones, secured with a leather belt adorned with intricate knotwork and sturdy trousers tucked into worn leather boots. Over his shoulders, he wore a heavy cloak fastened with a bronze brooch, the fabric bearing the scars of countless journeys. Every movement he made carried the quiet confidence of a seasoned warrior, his towering presence impossible to ignore. Basically, Jared Padalecki from Season 6 of Supernatural, because even though Vali is 24 years old, he'll look like his 27-year-old age, because the Mark of Cain hastened his growth to his physical prime. I chose this because I like the imposing height it gives Vali. Now, for the Mark of Cain's abilities, human version. When you die, you wake up as a knight of hell, otherwise as a human, superhuman strength, enough to rip people apart and crush buildings with some effort. Dean was able to beat up Castile, who is a seraphim, weakened or not, as a human with the mark. A skyscraper can fall on an angel, and they'll still not be hurt, but Dean was able to beat up a seraph to near unconsciousness. Invulnerability, mundane form of harm by humans, or even bullets would just not even make him flinch. Regeneration, able to heal to the extent of limbs once cut off, meaning organs as well, but if stabbed in the heart or the head is crushed, they die and come back as a knight of hell. Super stamina, able to go days without food or whatever with no ill effects. Powers, the first blade. Now, this is the most important part and also what makes the mark extremely dangerous. The person who has it can quite literally kill anything in creation when wielding the first blade in conjunction with the Mark of Cain. Do you guys want me to give him the first blade or nah? Limited telekinesis, able to call the first blade when not too far away. Knight of Hell powers, superhuman strength again. Though this time, even able to overpower full power Seraphim with ease, who could literally, if the Supernatural show actually showed it, physically with enough effort destroy mountains. But the catch is, Cain was able to do that after thousands of years of experience and also training from Lucifer, which caused him to have more control and be able to draw more power from the mark. So Vali is able to crush large buildings, that's it. After 1,000 years, possibly towns. Invulnerability, can't be killed. Full stop. If you want to deal with Vali, you must either trap him, make him sleep for eternity, because he just can't die. It's impossible. Or make him human again, in which case, trapping him will be easier. Telekinesis can crush city blocks, has also that kind of range. Teleporting/veil flight. Basically, they can teleport with their wings. Giant, big bat wings in smoke form. Normally invisible, but can be shown if wanted. This is more my theory about the demons in Supernatural, but I like it, so I'm going with is his explanation for their teleporting. Immunity. Spells that rip apart the Knight of Hell's body are negated. Simple as that. Though it truly needs to be absolute obliteration spells, like leaving nobody at all for it to be negated. Possession. Vali can basically possess people, but this can leave his body vulnerable and his original vampire powers are stuck with his body. The rest are soul-based. So no compulsion when in another body, unless they're also a vampire. Though since it isn't an original vampire body, he can't compel other vamps. Demonic smiting. Able to kill practically anything, just like the first blade, but not as extremely. Is more a red light blast of pure power that burns things to ash. Range is building-sized. Original vampire powers. Supernatural physical abilities meaning. Strength. Can crush large buildings speed. Hypersonic plus meaning. Mach 10 to 25, depending on the original vampire and their experience with how to use their powers. Durability. Same as a small building, you can say. Would need equal force to be able to destroy it. Just think of the show and what it took to harm Elijah and Klaus. Mind manipulation and compulsion. With enough experience, the original vampire can manipulate a person's perception and even be able to torture them. Think Silas like in the show. Though, Silas in this FIC will be much more powerful than portrayed in the show. They can of course also compel people and vampires. Not werewolves though. That's it. Months had passed since the battle, but its echoes reverberated far and wide. The name Vali Mikaelson was spoken in hushed whispers and exalted cries across the land. To many, he was no mere warrior. Legends sprouted like wildflowers, painting him as the reincarnation of Tyr, the Norse god of war, justice, and unrelenting strength. His unyielding ferocity in combat, his relentless protection of his kin, and his ability to crush all who opposed him mirrored the divine resolve of the one-handed god who bound the wolf Fenrir. Some whispered that Vali's scars were more than flesh deep, that they marked him as a mortal vessel of something beyond human. Vali heard the tales but cared little for the awe or fear of others. His solace lay in the quiet of the forested hills, the shadows of ancient pines, and the cold comfort of the stone caves where his family sought refuge each full moon. Yet, despite the stillness of their hidden life, a storm raged within him. The mark on his arm still burned, feeding his hunger for battle and sharpening instincts that sometimes felt foreign, memories and feelings he could not place, but which guided him like whispers from past life. The Mikaelson family's cave was deep and sprawling, with alcoves and crannies that provided pockets of privacy. The main chamber, where the family gathered, was dominated by a large fire pit. Shadows from the flickering flames danced across the walls, casting the space in a warm but eerie glow. Though it was a shared refuge, its sheer size allowed even the restless to slip away unnoticed if they were careful. Niklaus was one of those restless souls. Sitting near the edge of the firelight, Niklaus tapped his fingers against his knee, his eyes flicking toward the entrance. His jaw clenched and unclenched as he stared at the silvery light spilling in from the full moon. He waited for the perfect moment. When his family's voices lulled into silence and their attention scattered, Niklaus rose to his feet and crept toward the cave's edge. "Where are you going?" Henrik's voice, though hushed, startled him. The youngest Mikaelson had followed him, his wide eyes gleaming with curiosity. Niklaus turned, pressing a finger to his lips. "Back to sleep, Henrik," he whispered. "It's nothing." But Henrik wasn't so easily deterred. "You're going to see the wolves, aren't you?" Niklaus stiffened, his posture rigid. "No, I'm just getting some air." Henrik smirked knuvingly. "You always look like that when you're lying." Niklaus sighed, his frustration evident. "Even if I were going, which I'm not, you shouldn't be following me. It's dangerous. That's why I want to come with you," Henrik said, his voice earnest. "Please, Niklaus. I want to see them." "Absolutely not," Niklaus said firmly. "Do you know what Father would do if he found out? What the wolves might do if they caught us?" Henrik stepped closer, his young face set with determination. "But you're going anyway, aren't you? And you're not scared. You're brave, Niklaus. You'll keep me safe." "That's not the point," Niklaus hissed, glancing back toward the main fire where the rest of their family lingered. "It's one thing for me to risk it, but I can't dash. You can," Henrik interrupted, his voice rising just slightly. "I'll stay close. I won't make a sound, I promise." Niklaus groaned, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand. The wolves, they're not just animals, Henrik. They're monsters. That is what Father always told them. Though still, for some reason, the words always tasted like bile on his tongue. "They're people too," Henrik said softly. "Aren't they? People who are cursed. What if they don't want to hurt us? What if they're just scared?" Niklaus hesitated, Henrik's words catching him off guard. "You've been listening to Mother too much," he muttered. "Wolves aren't scared. They're predators. But you've always said I need to see things for myself," Henrik pressed, his voice pleading now. "You always tell me to be brave." Niklaus closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. "If we get caught, Father will kill me." "We won't get caught," Henrik promised, tugging on Niklaus's sleeve. "Please, Nick." Niklaus finally relented, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine, but you stay close to me, and we leave at the first sign of trouble." "Understood." Henrik nodded eagerly, a grin spreading across his face. "Understood." Niklaus glanced back toward the main chamber one last time, his gaze darting to Vali, who sat sharpening his axe near the fire. Though the two brothers often butted heads, Niklaus respected Vala's sharp instincts. He waited until Vala seemed engrossed in his task before slipping out with Henrik in tow. Unbeknownst to him, Vali wasn't as distracted as he seemed. The moment Niklaus moved, Vala's sharp ears caught the faintest shuffle of footsteps heading toward the entrance. He paused, tilting his head slightly, his enhanced hearing picking up the hurried whispers of his brothers. Henrik's voice was unmistakable. A growl of frustration rumbled low in Vala's throat. He gripped his axe tighter, his instincts warning him that this was no simple mischief. Yet he didn't follow, not yet. He would give Niklaus the benefit of the doubt, but his body remained tense, ready to spring into action. Niklaus and Henrik crept through the forest, the moonlight guiding their way. Henrik clung to his older brother, his earlier bravado waning as the howls of wolves echoed through the trees. They reached a dense thicket overlooking a clearing. Niklaus gestured for Henrik to crouch, and together they watched as the wolves began their transformation. Henrik's eyes widened in awe as the first of the wolves emerged. Its silver fur glistened like molten metal under the moonlight. Another wolf followed, then another, until the clearing was alive with their movement. "They're incredible," Henrik whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Niklaus didn't reply. His attention was focused on the wolves' movements, his instincts on edge. The black wolf, larger than the rest, lifted its head suddenly, sniffing the air, its glowing amber eyes locked onto their hiding spot. Niklaus's heart sank. "Henrik," he whispered urgently, "we need to leave. Now." Before Henrik could respond, the black wolf let out a menacing growl and lunged toward them. Back at the cave, Vala's instincts flared. The distant sound of snarls and a muffled cry reached his ears. He stood abruptly, his axe already in hand. "Elijah," he said, his voice low but urgent. "They're in trouble." Elijah frowned, looking up from the book in his lap. "What are you talking about?" "Henrik and Niklaus," Vala growled, heading for the entrance. "They're outside, and they're not alone." Without waiting for Elijah's response, Vali bolted into the forest. As the black wolf closed in, Niklaus shoved Henrik behind him, drawing a dagger he'd hidden in his boot. But the wolf was too fast, its massive body barreling toward them. And then, like a force of nature, Vali appeared. He crashed into the clearing with a roar, his axe gleaming in the moonlight. The black wolf turned its attention to him, growling low. Vali didn't hesitate. He swung his axe in a deadly arc, the blade biting into the wolf's side. The beast howled in pain, staggering back. "Get him out of here!" Vali barked, his voice like thunder. Vali barreled into the clearing, his axe flashing in the moonlight. He met the black wolf head-on, swinging his weapon with terrifying speed and precision. The blade bit deep into the creature's side, and it howled in pain, stumbling back. Niklaus and Henrik froze, their eyes wide as Vali stood between them and the pack of wolves now emerging from the shadows. "Stop standing there like a fool and do as you're told, Niklaus. Get Henrik out of here," Vali shouted, his voice a roar of command. Niklaus hesitated for only a moment before grabbing Henrik's arm and pulling him away. The black wolf recovered, its eyes burning with rage. It lunged at Vali, its claws slashing through the air. Vala dodged, but another wolf joined the fray, its teeth snapping at his arm. He swung his axe in a wide arc, driving them back, but not before a third wolf lunged from the side. Its claws raked across Henrik's arm, drawing blood. Henrik cried out in pain, and Niklaus turned, his eyes wild with fury. Vali roared, his voice shaking the very air, and charged the wolves. His axe moved like a blur, cutting through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency. The black wolf, sensing its pack's defeat, growled once more before retreating into the forest, its pack following. Vala turned to his brothers, his chest heaving, his body slick with sweat and blood. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough. Henrik held his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. "It's just a scratch," he said, though his voice wavered. Vala's eyes narrowed, and he knelt beside Henrik, examining the wound. We need to get back to the cave, he said. Now. Niklaus nodded, his usual bravado tempered by the fear of what might have happened. As they made their way back, Vala's thoughts swirled. The mark burned beneath his skin, his instincts screaming that the danger was far from over. In the distance, the wolves howled again, a sound that carried a promise of more blood to come. For the Mikaelsons, the danger was far from over. The cave was cloaked in uneasy silence as Vali, Niklaus, and Henrik returned. Henrik's arm was wrapped hastily in a strip of Niklaus's tunic, blood seeping through the fabric. Elijah and Cole stood as they entered, their faces pale with concern. What happened? Elijah demanded, striding forward. His eyes darted to Henrik, then to Niklaus, his tone sharp. You took him out during the full moon? Niklaus raised his hands defensively. I thought we'd stay far enough from the wolves. I didn't think Dash. You didn't think at all. Elijah snapped, cutting him off. You risked Henrik's life. Henrik flinched, his small frame trembling. Vala stepped between them, his voice a low growl. Enough, Elijah. Blink and wait. Right now, we need to make sure he's safe. Rebecca appeared from the shadows, her wide eyes fixed on Henrik's arm. Henrik, she whispered, her voice trembling. You're hurt. It's just a scratch, Henrik said weakly, but his face was pale, his body trembling from the shock. Rebecca knelt beside him, brushing his hair from his face. We should clean it, she murmured. Mother will know what to do. Vala nodded and turned to Cole. Fetch Mother. Now. Cole hesitated, his expression unreadable, before slipping out of the cave. When Michael entered the cave shortly after, led by Cole, his presence was like a storm. His cold blue eyes swept over his children, landing on Henrik's injured arm. His jaw clenched, his expression hardening into a mask of anger and frustration. What happened? He barked. Niklaus opened his mouth to explain, but Michael raised a hand, silencing him. You endangered us all, he snapped. Every full moon, I tell you to stay hidden, to stay safe, and this is why. It wasn't Niklaus's fault, Henrik protested, but Michael ignored him, turning his fury toward the situation at large. These wolves, he muttered, pacing the cave. Every month, we cower like animals in a hole while they roam free. Freya is already dead by the plague, and now I almost lost another child because of them. Michael, Esther's voice cut through the tension as she stepped into the cave. Her eyes fell on Henrik, her face softening with maternal worry. She hurried to his side, gently unwrapping the bloodied cloth around his arm. Michael turned to her, his voice low and cold. This cannot continue, Esther. We cannot continue living in fear. She glanced up at him, her expression wary. The wolves are a part of this land, Michael. There's nothing we can do to change that. There is, he said sharply, his gaze hardening. You spoke once of magic, of a spell that could make us stronger, that could make us immortal. Is the froos. Her henstilling over Henrik's wound. Later that night, Michael and Esther retreated to a secluded grove, far from the prying eyes of their children. The air was thick with tension, the moonlight casting long shadows across their faces. Michael, Esther began, her voice firm, I will not perform such magic. It goes against nature. Nature be damned. Mikaelsons. Did nature protect Freya? Did nature save Henrik tonight? No, nature abandoned us. Esther shook her head, her hands trembling. What you're asking for is forbidden. The spirits dash. The spirits don't care about us. Michael interrupted, his voice rising. Every day, we grow weaker, Esther. The wolves grow stronger. If we don't do something, we will lose everything. Our children, our home, our lives. Esther looked away, her heart heavy. I told you about that spell as a cautionary tale. Michael, not as a solution. The witch who created it defied the balance of life and death. It will come with consequences, ones we cannot foresee. Michael stepped closer, his voice low and insistent. What consequences could be worse than burying another child? Than watching our family torn apart? He grasped her shoulders, his eyes blazing with desperation. You have the power to save us, Esther. To protect our children. Would you truly let fear stop you? Esther's resolve wavered. She had seen Michael's anger before, But this was something different, a deep, primal fear of loss that mirrored her own. "And what the price, Michael?" she whispered. "What will this spell demand of us?" Michael's jaw tightened, his voice softening just enough to sound convincing. "Whatever the cost, it cannot outweigh the lives of our children. You know this." Esther closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I'll need time," she said quietly. "Time to gather what's required, to prepare." Michael nodded, relief flashing across his face. "Then do it. Whatever it takes, Esther. Make us strong. Make us unbreakable." As Esther turned away, her heart heavy with dread, Michael's gaze hardened. He would protect his family at any cost, even if it meant defying the gods themselves. Meanwhile, the children huddled together around the fire. Vali sat apart, sharpening his axe, his sharp eyes scanning the cave entrance. Rebecca tended to Henrik, whispering soothing words to distract him from the pain. "Where do you think Mother and Father went?" Cole asked, his voice unusually subdued. Elijah shook his head. "Whatever it is, it's not our concern. We need to focus on keeping Henrik safe." Vala didn't speak, but his instincts churned uneasily. Something was coming, something far greater than any of them could imagine. And deep down, in the quiet recesses of his mind, the mark pulsed with a strange anticipation, as if it, too, knew that the Mikaelson family was on the brink of a transformation that would change their lives forever. The cave, once a place of refuge and solace, now felt like a tomb. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the bitter remnants of the battle. The fire had dimmed, casting long shadows that flickered and danced like specters across the stone walls. The soft rustle of wind outside and the distant howls of wolves in the forest beyond only deepened the sense of unease that clung to the family. It was as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. Henrik lay unconscious, his small body wrapped in blankets and his injured arm still wrapped hastily with strips of cloth. The wound, though not fatal, was deep enough to worry the family, its edges crusted with blood. His pale face was tense, his brow furrowed in pain even in his sleep. The other Mikaelson children gathered near the fire, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and worry. Niklaus, his usual bravado tempered by fear, sat with his arms crossed, his gaze distant, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. He kept glancing at Henrik, his thoughts tormented by what could have happened in the forest if Vali hadn't arrived in time. Elijah, ever the mediator, sat beside Niklaus, his eyes dark with concern, but with a composure that barely hid the storm beneath. His mind raced with questions. How had the wolves found them, when that never happened before? Why had they been so aggressive tonight? The danger had been close, too close. His instincts told him this wasn't just a random attack. There was something more to it. But what? Rebecca sat on the opposite side of the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest. She watched Henrik with quiet sorrow in her eyes, her heart aching for her youngest brother. But even as she tended to his wounds, a flicker of rage gnawed at her. Why had they been so reckless? Niklaus had been the one to lead Henrik out there in the first place. And why hadn't Vali been there to stop them before things got so far? Vali, who usually kept to the edges of the group, sharpening his axe or disappearing into the wilderness to brood, was even more distant tonight. He sat apart from the others, his sharp eyes scanning the entrance to the cave as if waiting for something, anything, to happen. But his mind was elsewhere. He could feel the mark on his arm pulsing faintly, a quiet whisper that warned him of an impending storm, something far worse than any battle they'd faced before. He could feel it in his bones, deep in his soul, like the steady hum of an ancient drum. Vala's hand gripped the edge of his axe, his knuckles white. The thought that something was off had been growing stronger throughout the evening, a strange sensation like someone watching from shadows. The others had been so focused on Henrik's injury and their own fears that no one seemed to notice the quiet shift in the air. It was then that the silence was broken by footsteps echoing from outside the cave. The sound was muffled at first, but quickly grew louder. The brothers exchanged wary glances. "Father." Niklaus began with a whisper, his voice tight with apprehension. "What is Father doing?" Rebecca, who had been whispering comforting words to Henrik, looked up sharply, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" But it was Elijah who answered, his voice low. "He's been acting strange tonight, hasn't he? Haven't you noticed it?" Mikaelsson nodded slowly, though his thoughts were elsewhere, torn between the urgency of Henrik's injury and the strange, unsettling feeling that had settled in his stomach. They had all known their father to be ruthless, but tonight there was something different, something cold and calculating in the way he had looked at them earlier, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Vala's jaw tightened, but his gaze remained fixed on the entrance to the cave. He knew something was wrong. The mark on his arm burned now, the sensation sharp and unfamiliar. It felt as though something ancient was stirring, something that was not of this world. He had always trusted his instincts, but tonight they screamed at him, warning him of a danger that was beyond anything he had ever faced. The cave door creaked open slowly, the hinges protesting under the weight of the darkness. In stepped Michael, his tall form silhouetted against the moonlight that spilled through the cracks in the stone. His eyes, those cold, unfeeling eyes, swept over the gathered family, but there was no warmth in his gaze. No relief, only something darker, something more sinister. The family tensed at the sight of him. Elijah's eyes narrowed, his hand subtly reaching for the dagger at his waist, while Niklaus instinctively straightened, his jaw set in a firm line. Rebecca glanced at Vali, her eyes wide with a mixture of worry and confusion. Even Henrik, still unconscious, seemed to sense something in the air, his brow twitching, though his eyes remained closed. The air in the cave was thick with tension, the usual warmth of the fire flickering eerily in the silence. The siblings stood in a tight, uneasy circle, their gazes darting from one another to their father. Michael stood before them, an expression of resolve carved into his features, though his eyes flickered with something softer, a flicker of love veiled beneath the coldness of his actions. "Father," Elijah began, his voice laden with suspicion. His brow furrowed as he looked at the goblets in Michael's hands, the shimmering liquid within them reflecting the dim light of the fire. The air around them seemed to pulse with a strange energy, one that made his instincts scream for caution. "Father, what are you doing?" Rebecca's voice was fragile, laced with uncertainty. Her gaze, wide and apprehensive, shifted to the dark liquid in one goblet and the glowing light in the other, that their father for some reason has brought with him, directing it in their direction as if beckoning them to drink. Michael's lips curled into a small, affectionate smile as he looked at his children. His voice was warm, yet carried a sharp edge, a command veiled in the guise of concern. "You've all been so brave. I've watched you grow stronger, each of you. But I cannot let you remain vulnerable any longer. You are my children. You must be more, stronger, unbreakable. I would not be a father if I let you fall behind." His gaze rested on each of them in turn, his eyes filled with a genuine but chilling care. Elijah's expression hardened, suspicion growing as he stood tall, his body tense. "What do you mean, Father?" "It is time for you to drink this," Michael said softly, his voice now almost tender as he extended the goblets to his children. "It will make you stronger. It will protect you." The firelight danced in the reflection of the goblets, casting the shadows of his family long and distorted. His words, though gentle, had the weight of finality. "Father, I don't trust this," Elijah continued, his voice firm with uncertainty. He knew it must be some form of magic, but his instinct for telling him to run, yet fear also froze him. Vali stepped forward, his gaze unwavering, and for a brief moment, his sharp instincts flared. "Father," he said, his tone laced with a silent warning, "what is truly in those goblets?" For a moment, Michael hesitated, as if struck by the question. Then, his hand clenched around the goblets, his eyes softened ever so slightly. "It is what you need, my son, what you deserve." The silence stretched as Esther, standing at the edge of the chamber, met her husband's gaze. Her eyes were filled with a profound sadness, yet they carried a resignation, a silent agreement. She stepped forward then, her fingers trembling as she reached into the air. A soft, eerie glow began to form around her hands as she wove her magic through the room, an invisible force settling over each of her children. "Mother," Rebecca whispered, her voice tight with fear. "What are you doing?" "I am protecting you," Esther whispered, her voice barely audible, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I cannot let you resist him." With a flick of her wrist, her magic spread through their bodies, binding them. The siblings stood frozen in place, their limbs stiff and unyielding. They were paralyzed, not by force, but by an overwhelming compulsion, their minds unable to break free from Esther's spell. Michael moved with cold efficiency, his footsteps reverberating in the silence of the room like a grim countdown. The weight of the moment hung thick in the air, each breath more labored than the last. He had always been the force that held the family together, but today, he was the one who would tear them apart. His movements were slow, deliberate, every gesture carefully calculated, as though he were a man administering a final, necessary act, something to be done without hesitation or mercy. His eyes were hard, his jaw clenched, but there was a flicker in them when they met Elijah's gaze. Elijah stood with his back straight, though every muscle in his body screamed to run, to fight, to protect his family. The truth had already settled in his chest like a stone, but still, his heart thudded erratically against it. The man before him was both his father and the executioner, and it was too much to comprehend, too much to bear. Michael reached for the goblet with a sure, unshakable hand. His fingers tightened around the rim, the silver surface gleaming coldly in the dim light of the room. The liquid within shimmered ominously, its color dark and heavy. For a brief moment, Michael's gaze softened, and Elijah could see the smallest trace of something in his father's eyes, something that might have been love or regret, or perhaps the recognition of a family torn apart by years of pain. But that fleeting softness was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. "Elijah," Michael's voice was steady, yet beneath the harshness of his words, there was a tone that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. "This is for you, for our family. You must trust me." Elijah's breath hitched. His father's words struck like a blow, sharp and unexpected. Trust. Trust. How could he trust the man who had decided to end them? The man who had in Elijah's eyes never once shown mercy, never once allowed for understanding to seep into his cruel heart. There was no trust to be found here, only cold authority. Only a father who believed his children needed to be broken, molded into something else, something he could control. "I can't," Elijah whispered, his voice trembling despite himself. His pulse raced in his ears, deafening him to everything else in the room. He could feel the eyes of his siblings on him, the weight of their fear pressing down on him, but he couldn't make himself look at them. His gaze was locked on Michael, on the goblet in his father's hand. Michael did not respond, but there was no cruelty in the silence that followed, just an unyielding sense of inevitability. With a steady, practiced motion, Michael tilted the goblet toward Elijah's lips, his grip firm, yet gentler than it had ever been in all their years together. Elijah's body fought against the restraint of Esther's magic, every instinct screaming for him to pull away, to shout, to run. But his muscles betrayed him, stiffening under the weight of unseen forces. He could not move, could not break free. The goblet's rim touched his lips, cool and unyielding. The scent of the liquid was faint. Sweet, almost, but something darker lingered underneath, something foreign, something wrong. "Please, Father," Elijah managed to whisper, though his voice broke. "Don't do this." Michael's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, and Elijah swore he saw something like pity, before his father's expression hardened once again, his face resolute. The liquid slipped past Elijah's lips, cold and unforgiving. At first, there was nothing, just the silence. The bitter aftertaste of the poison settled in his mouth, and for one brief, horrifying moment, Elijah thought he had miscalculated. That maybe, just maybe, his father was wrong. But then it hit him. The cold spread first in his chest, then down to his limbs, an icy numbness that took hold of him with a brutal intensity. His heart fluttered unsteadily, like a bird caught in a cage, and every inch of him seemed to freeze under the assault. He gasped, eyes wide, his chest tightening as though invisible hands were squeezing the life from him. What have you done?" Elijah's words were choked, panic flooding his veins. He struggled to breathe, his breath coming in shallow, painful gasps. Michael's face remained stoic as ever, his gaze unwavering. There was no hesitation, no sorrow, only the cold resolve of a man who had made his decision. "I love you, Elijah," Michael murmured, his voice low, quieter now, as though trying to offer some comfort, some final assurance. But it was no comfort. It was in Elijah's eyes a final lie, a justification that meant nothing in the face of his agony. The poison was working its way through him faster now, seizing his limbs, filling his throat with a burning, suffocating heat. No, you can't love me," Elijah gasped, his body convulsing as the poison set fire to his insides. He tried to speak, to shout at his father, to demand to know why, but the words caught in his throat, as though the very air around him had turned to stone. Michael's eyes softened, but it was too little, too late. His voice was quiet but resolute, carrying the weight of his unshakable belief in what he had done. "This is the only way, Elijah." His words hung in the air like a death sentence, final and irreversible. "You will understand in time. This is for our family." Elijah felt his knees buckle, the force of the poison making his limbs betray him. And as he collapsed to the cold stone floor, his vision blurred, the world fading at the edges. Through the haze of panic and dread, he could hear the faint sound of his father's voice, but it was distant now, almost unreal. "You will thank me someday," Michael said. But Elijah didn't hear the finality in his words, didn't feel the sorrow behind them. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart, slowing with each beat until his world went black. Next, he moved to Cole, his hands as gentle as before, though his eyes carried a shadow of something darker as he extended the goblet to his second son. Cole's lip curled, but he, too, was helpless against the restraining magic Esther wove around them. "You can't do this, Father. We trust you. How could you betray us like this?" Cole hissed, his voice defiant. Cole had always been the wild one, the one who didn't care for Michael's orders, who thrived on chaos and defiance. Unlike Elijah, Cole had never been the protector, nor had he ever sought his father's approval in the same way. He resented Michael's cruelty, resented the control he had over their lives. But deep down, there had always been something else, something he could never quite shake. As Michael stood before him, Cole couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal. Michael had always used them as pawns in some sick game, but now, to see his father acting with such coldness, it was unbearable. "Father," Cole muttered, continuing, but there was no respect in his voice. "This is madness. You can't honestly believe that this is the right path. We've done everything you wanted. We've suffered for you. And for what? To drink death at your hands." Michael's gaze hardened, and Cole saw it in his father's eyes. Nothing had ever mattered to Michael more than control. Nothing had ever mattered more than power. And now, it seemed, Michael believed this to be the ultimate way to solidify his family's fate. "You always were the wild one, Cole," Michael said, his voice cold but tinged with something else. "Frustration? Regret? Too rebellious. Too defiant. You never understood discipline. You always fought against the one person who tried to give you the guidance you so desperately needed." Cole let out a hollow laugh, bitterness in every syllable. "Guidance? You call this guidance? You're nothing but a tyrant who never cared about us. You've never been a father. Not once." Michael's jaw clenched at Cole's words, but he did not respond. He had made his decision, and Cole was to pay for every act of defiance in his life. Cole had never feared death, had always mocked it, but now, with Michael standing before him, goblet in hand, he could taste the inevitability of it. The poison was not just in the goblet. It was in everything his father had ever done to them. "No more speeches, Cole," Michael said with finality, his hand gripping Cole's jaw, forcing his head back. Cole struggled against the invisible magic holding him in place, but his body could not resist. His breath quickened, panic rising, but it did no good. "Father, I'm not your puppet," Cole spat, his voice hoarse with a mix of anger and fear. "I won't drink that. But it was too late. Michael's hand was steady as he tipped the goblet, forcing the liquid past Cole's lips. The moment it hit his mouth, Cole felt his body rebel against him, the poison sinking deep into his veins, spreading like wildfire. He felt it all, the burn of betrayal, the cold grip of death creeping in, and the sickening realization that there was no escape. Cole's body went rigid, and his knees buckled as he collapsed onto the cold stone floor. His breath came in shallow, labored gasps, and his eyes burned with the agony of what his father had done. "Why, father?" Cole whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Why did you have to do this?" Michael's expression softened for a moment, just a moment, before he turned away, unable to meet his son's gaze. "You'll understand in time, Cole." But Cole didn't care. He was fading fast, his body succumbing to the poison, the world around him slipping away. All he could feel was the sting of abandonment, the coldness of his father's love, a love that had always been conditional, always had a price. Michael turned towards Rebecca, his gaze softening just for a moment as he saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. She had always been the most fragile, the most vulnerable, the one who needed protection. Yet he knew that this act, this poison, was something that would grant her the strength she had always yearned for. "Rebecca," he said, his voice unusually gentle, "I know you have always longed for something more than what you've been given. You will have that strength now, I promise you." Rebecca shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "Father, please, please don't make me drink that." Her voice cracked, the terror in her eyes clear as she struggled against the invisible binds of Esther's magic. "I don't understand. What is this? What are you doing?" Michael's expression remained steady, but there was a flicker of sorrow, of something that could almost be mistaken for regret. "I'm doing this because I love you, Rebecca. I've always loved you. This is the only way to ensure your survival, your strength. You will be stronger for it." Rebecca's eyes welled with tears, her lips trembling. "You're my father. You're supposed to protect me, not do this. Please, I don't want this. Don't make me." The desperation in her voice pierced the air, but Michael's grip on the goblet tightened, his resolve unwavering. He stepped closer to her, his voice unwavering, though there was a sadness in it that could not be masked. "You have always been my little girl, Rebecca, and it is because of that love that I must do this," he said softly, though his hands were firm as he tipped the goblet to her lips. "Please, father," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper, her face streaked with tears. "I don't want to die. I don't want to lose myself." The poison already simmered in the goblet, dark and dangerous. Michael's hands were steady as he pressed the rim to her lips, his face an unreadable mask. "You will not die. You will live, Rebecca. But you must be strong. You must be more than what you are now. For our family. For me." Rebecca, still locked in place by her mother's magic, felt the pressure of her father's hand against her chin, the cool touch of the goblet pressing into her skin. She fought the urge to gag as the liquid touched her lips, the warmth and the sharpness of it making her stomach twist. "Father, please." Her voice was a strangled plea. "I beg you, don't dash," but Michael was unmoved. His eyes were filled with something unreadable, but there was no hesitation in his actions. With a firm, unyielding hand, he tipped the goblet, forcing the liquid past her lips. Rebecca's eyes widened in terror as the poison slid down her throat, her body reacting immediately, her chest tightening with each painful breath. "No, no, please dash," Rebecca gasped, her limbs trembling, her voice rising in panic. "Father, you've dash." Her words broke off into strangled sobs as the poison coursed through her veins, turning her vision to darkness. The liquid felt like fire, cold and burning all at once, spreading through her body like a spreading ice storm. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble as her body went rigid, her chest constricting in agony. Michael stood before her, watching her collapse to her knees, the strength draining from her frame. His heart clenched at the sight, but his face betrayed no emotion, no regret. Only a calm, silent understanding. "I love you, Rebecca," he whispered, his voice barely audible above her frantic gasps for breath. "You'll be strong. You'll be unstoppable. Rebecca's eyes fluttered, the poison pulling her into unconsciousness. The terror in her eyes remained as her words faltered one last time. "Father, why? I trusted you." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, the last trace of defiance flickering in her before she succumbed to the dark magic. Her body went still, the warmth of life draining from her as the poison took its hold, sealing her fate. Michael looked at her, his hand still outstretched, but his gaze hardened into something colder, something that could not be undone. "Trust me, Rebecca," he said quietly. "In time, you will see this was the only way." Esther stood by, her eyes filled with anguish as she watched their daughter suffering. She felt the weight of her husband's actions more deeply than anyone, but she was powerless to stop him now. It was done. There was no turning back. Michael's eyes moved to Mikaelsons next. The tension in the air thickened, as though the very earth was holding its breath. Mikaelsons had always been the wild one, the one who could not be easily controlled, the one who resented Michael most for the punishments he had endured throughout his life. "Father, no," Mikaelsons growled, his voice low and filled with barely contained fury. His hand flexed around the hilt of the dagger at his side, but it was useless against the magic that held him in place. He had spent years defying Michael, years trying to escape his grasp, but now, here in this dark, twisted moment, there was no escape. Michael looked at his son with cold, calculating eyes. "Mikaelsons," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I've always protected you, even when you couldn't understand why. This is for your own good. For all of us." Mikaelsons' heart raced, his mind swirling. He could feel the poison creeping closer, the bitter knowledge of what was to come settling like a stone in his stomach. His eyes flicked to Henrik, still unconscious and pale, and then to Rebecca, lying motionless on the floor. Panic clawed at his chest. "You're not doing this," Mikaelsons spat, his voice thick with defiance. "I won't let you." Michael's grip tightened on the goblet, his jaw clenching. "You've always been difficult, Mikaelsons. Always questioning, always resisting. But this time you'll obey me. You'll see that I've always known what was best for you. Always." Mikaelsons' mind raced, the words biting at him like wolves snapping at his heels. He had never felt more betrayed in his life. He had always feared Michael's anger, but now there was an emptiness in his father's eyes, a coldness that no words could explain. "You're nothing but a tyrant," Mikaelsons snarled, his voice breaking with the weight of all the years of torment. "You're no father to me. You never were." Michael stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. There was no mercy in them now. "I've given you everything, Mikaelsons, and you've never understood it. You're too blinded by your own anger, your own resentment. Drink this, and you will see the truth." Mikaelsons struggled against the magic that held him, his limbs stiff and unwilling, but Michael's power was stronger. With a cold, swift motion, Michael lifted the goblet to Mikaelsons' lips, forcing it close, his hand firm around Mikaelsons' jaw. "No!" Mikaelsons cried, his voice rising in desperation. He twisted his head, trying to break free, but it was useless. The taste of metal and poison filled his mouth as Michael tipped the goblet, forcing the liquid past his lips. Mikaelsons' eyes burned with rage, with a fury so intense it threatened to consume him. The moment the poison hit his tongue, the cold fire spread through his veins, and his body stiffened, an involuntary cry tearing from his throat. His vision blurred, and the poison, like a knife twisting in his gut, began to overwhelm him. The world spun, as though the earth itself was tilting beneath him, and the pain gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. He could feel it in every fiber of his being, the burn, the slow suffocation of life. He gasped for air, but there was none to be found. His body felt heavy, sinking, his limbs betraying him. His voice cracked as he tried to speak, his words broken and distorted by the poison. "Father, why?" His voice was hoarse, each word a battle against the poison and the shock of betrayal that burned even more fiercely than the venom now coursing through his blood. Michael looked at him, his face an emotionless mask, yet there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something almost imperceptible, like regret or sorrow. But it was fleeting, gone before it could be acknowledged. His hand was still firmly on the goblet, his grip unyielding. "You will understand in time, Niklaus," Michael said quietly, his voice almost distant, as if speaking from another world. "This is for our survival, for our strength. This is the only way." Niklaus' body trembled, his skin cold, sweat beading on his forehead. The world around him was fading, his body buckling beneath the weight of the poison. He felt the ground beneath his knees give way as he slumped forward, unable to hold himself upright any longer. "No," he breathed, a broken whisper, his mind spinning with the sharp edges of reality and the dark promise of death. But Michael's grip never faltered, his hand lifting from Niklaus' face as he allowed his son to fall, collapsing like a rag doll onto the floor. His breathing was shallow, ragged. For a moment, there was silence. Michael stared down at him, as though considering what had just transpired. His son, the one who had so often defied him, was now brought low by his own hand, by his love. This twisted love that Michael believed would save them all. And yet, as he gazed at Niklaus, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, there was something in his eyes that could not be denied. A flicker of sorrow. "I'm sorry, Niklaus," Michael whispered, though he knew his son could not hear him. "But I must do this for you, for all of us." Michael's steps were measured as he approached Finn. There was no hesitation in his movements, only the quiet weight of his purpose. The ritual was nearing its end, and the air felt heavier with each passing second, each step that brought him closer to the final sun he had to break. Finn stood tall, his eyes locked with Michael's, unwavering. But beneath his defiant gaze, there was something else, something strained, something fragile. He had always been the most sensitive, the most compassionate of Michael's children, save Niklaus. It was that very tenderness that made the task before Michael the hardest. For unlike Klaus, Finn never let it become weakness. If there was one child who might still look to him for guidance, for approval, it was Finn. And yet, here they were, standing on opposite sides, a gulf of betrayal and duty separating them. Michael stopped before Finn, the goblet held firmly in his hand, its contents shimmering with lethal intent. He could see the tremor in Finn's jaw, the silent battle waging behind his eyes. Finn's hands were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white with the effort to contain his emotion. He knew what was coming. He had known it for some time, but that didn't make it any easier to face. "Finn," Michael spoke softly, the tone of his voice betraying a slight hesitation, the first sign of the father he had been, the father he had tried to be. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt hollow. Finn was no longer the child Michael had once held in his arms. He had grown into something else, something Michael had been unable to control, unable to bend to his will. Finn's voice was tight, barely a whisper, yet there was a clear defiance in it. "No, father," he said, shaking his head, his chest rising and falling with each breath, his gaze unwavering. "I will not drink from that goblet. I will not accept this." The sorrow in Finn's voice hit Michael harder than any shout, harder than any curse. He had failed in every sense, and yet the decision had been made long before they stood here now. There was no room for sentiment, no space for mercy. Not anymore. Michael stepped closer, his face inscrutable. He could feel the warmth of Finn's breath, the silent plea in the young man's eyes, and yet there was no room for that. His hand reached out, steady, and with one swift motion, he lifted the goblet to Finn's lips. "I love you, Finn," Michael said, and this time the words were heavy with a weight Finn could never have understood. The words were not meant to console, but to seal a final, unbreakable bond. This was the only way, the only chance to redeem them all. "This is for you, for our family." Finn recoiled slightly, but he was held fast by Esther's magic, his body stiff and unyielding. He could feel the warm sting of tears at the corners of his eyes, but he forced them down. His hands trembled at his sides, clenched fists betraying the battle between heart and mind. "No," he said again, his voice breaking this time. "You've lost your way, father. You've lost us all." Michael's grip on the goblet tightened, the cold silver of the cup pressed firmly against Finn's lips. The poison inside shimmered, deadly and irrevocable. Finn could feel the cold metal against his skin, the finality in it. His breath hitched as Michael's eyes softened for the briefest of moments. But the softness was fleeting, gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. Finn could not look away from the goblet, could not escape the inevitability. The father he had once known was long gone. There was no escape from this moment. There was only the poison, the darkness waiting. With a swift motion, Michael tilted the goblet, and the liquid slid past Finn's lips. The coldness of the liquid made his body shudder, his chest tightening in protest. For a moment, there was only the sensation of it, a cold, burning presence that seemed to linger on his tongue, bitter and wrong. But then the poison took hold. Finn's body froze, his muscles locking up, and a deep, bone-chilling cold rushed through his veins. His heart faltered, skipping a beat, then slowing, as though his entire existence was being siphoned away, piece by piece. The edges of his vision blurred, the air thickened, and he gasped for breath, though it felt as though his chest were being pressed in by an invisible weight. "Father!" Finn gasped, his voice rasping, desperate. But Michael only stared down at him. His face was calm, almost serene, as though he had made peace with the decision. But Finn could see it now. The conflict, the love that still lingered, even as it was buried beneath layers of conviction. "I love you, Finn," Michael repeated, his voice softer now, though it didn't ease the pain. "You will understand in time. This is the only way to protect you, to protect us all." Finn wanted to shout, wanted to scream in defiance, to demand that Michael see what he had done to them all, what he had destroyed. But the poison continued to tighten its grip, and his voice failed him, the words dying in his throat. "You are my son," Michael continued, his tone quieter now, softer, like a whisper of regret that would never be heard. "And you are part of this family. You always will be." But Finn could no longer hear the words. His vision dimmed, the edges of the world folding in on themselves as the poison consumed him. His limbs went numb, his body sagging under its weight. And as the last breath left his body, he crumpled to the floor, his eyes finally closing in the painful silence. Michael stood over him, his expression unreadable as he watched his son collapse. It was done. The family was breaking one by one, but the mission would not waver. "Rest now, Finn," Michael murmured quietly, almost to himself. "Rest for the family." And as he turned toward Vali, the final child, Michael's steps were resolute. There was nothing left to lose. Michael's steps were heavy as he finally approached Vali, his third-born, the son who had always been the most loyal, the most steadfast in their shared cause. For years, Michael had believed that his bond with Vali was unbreakable, that this son, the warrior, would be the one to carry his legacy. But now, in the face of his children's demise, everything had become distorted. The world had shifted, and Vali was the last piece that remained. Vala's eyes narrowed, his sharp gaze locking onto his father's with an intensity that was unwavering. The tension in the air was thick, palpable. He could feel his father's sorrow, but also the finality that Michael had come to terms with. There was no escape. "You will make me proud, Vali," Michael said, his voice quiet. Yet the words carried a weight that hung heavy between them. "I have only ever wanted to make you strong, to ensure our survival." Vala's chest tightened, frustration coursing through him. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, to understand why his father was doing this. But the power of Esther's magic had bound him, and his body refused to move. The words caught in his throat, his breath shallow as he fought the urge to break free. Michael's expression was unreadable as he reached for the goblet, his hand steady as he tipped it to Vala's lips. He said nothing more, but his actions spoke volumes. The liquid slid down Vala's throat, but nothing happened. There was no immediate reaction. Vala's body fought the poison, the effects slow to take hold. His rage intensified as he glared at his father. He finally began to start to overpower the hold of his mother's magic through sheer rage. Esther's voice soon rang out, sharp and filled with urgency. "The poison isn't working. You need to kill him yourself, Michael." The words cut through the thick silence like a knife, but Vala barely registered them. His gaze was fixed on the carnage that surrounded him. His siblings, one by one, collapsing to the ground as the poison tore through their bodies. The horror of their deaths was unbearable, and Vala's heart pounded with disbelief. Why? Vali gasped with rage as he continued to break free, the question more to himself than anyone else. His mind was reeling, the loss of his siblings washing over him like a storm. The weight of it was so overwhelming that the mark, which had guided him through every moment of his life, fell silent for the first time. Vali was distracted, his focus torn between his father and a horrific scene unfolding before him. He barely noticed Michael's hand, already drawing his sword, until it was too late. Michael's instincts overtook his grief. With swift efficiency, he lunged forward, driving the sword into Vala's chest. The blade cut deep, through muscle, bone, and the very essence of their bond. Vala's eyes widened, shock and pain flashing across his face as the steel tore through him. Blood spilled from his mouth, splattering across Michael's shoulder as the blade sank deeper. But Vala did not fall, not immediately. He remained standing, his hands trembling at his sides, his breath ragged as his body fought to hold on. "Father," Vali whispered, his voice weak, the shock evident in his eyes as he looked at Michael. His body was rigid, but his mind was reeling, struggling to process what had just happened. The betrayal was too much to comprehend. Michael stood motionless, his sword still embedded in Vala's chest. The grip he had on the hilt was firm, but his heart was breaking. For the first time in his life, Michael truly saw his son not as the warrior he had raised, but as a boy who had trusted him completely, only to be let down in the most unforgivable way. Vala's bloodlust had fallen away, replaced by confusion, disbelief, and a sorrow so deep it threatened to drown them both. Vala's gaze locked onto Michael's, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping his lips despite the agony that racked his body. The words came slowly, but with such venom that they felt like daggers. So this is it then?" Vali rasped, each word a struggle. "You've decided to finish it yourself? Finally decided to join Mother in her quest to kill me? All these years, her poisons and curses failing. And the one person I thought loved me most is the one who kills me." Michael's heart twisted, but his grip on the sword remained unyielding. He couldn't tear his eyes away from his son, from the raw pain in his expression. For a moment, Michael felt as if he were drowning in grief, unsure of where his emotions ended and his duty began. His mind confused by his son's words. Vali, however, wasn't done. With a final surge of strength, he pushed against the sword, forcing it deeper into his chest, as if seeking the release that only death could bring. His body trembled violently, his blood pooling beneath him as he sputtered, his voice thick with pain. "I was the abomination, wasn't I?" Vala's words were barely more than a whisper, but they cut to the core. Michael's breath hitched, his own heart breaking at the question, the pain in his son's voice unmistakable. Vala's eyes widened, filled with both pain and confusion, as he met Michael's gaze. "What about them? What did my siblings do? What was their crime, Father? They were innocent." Michael's throat tightened, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The words of his son reverberated in his mind, but his mouth was dry, his response nothing more than a whisper. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Vali, the realization that the poison had failed, that his son had resisted death when the others had succumbed, filled Michael with a quiet horror. He had wanted to end this quickly, but now he was caught in a moment of uncertainty. This wasn't what he wanted. He hadn't wanted to kill Vali with his own hands, yet here he was, unable to stop. "I didn't want this," Michael said, his voice cracking, the sorrow breaking through the facade he had kept so carefully intact. He hadn't wanted this for his children. He hadn't wanted to be the one to end their lives. But there was no other choice. There never had been. The sword had to remain in place. Vala's breathing grew slower, weaker, each gasping breath more labored than the last. His body began to grow still, the fight draining from him as his final moment stretched on. With a final, guttural sigh, Vala's body went limp in Michael's arms, the light draining from his eyes as life left him. Michael stood over his son's lifeless form, the sword still buried in his chest. And for the first time in his life, he could not reconcile the person he had been with the person he had become. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating him in a way nothing else had ever done. Finally, he pulled out his sword and moved to Henrik, the youngest. The boy, still too young, was untouched by the poison goblet, but was made to drink from the other one where the effect will take place far in the future. Michael held his son gently, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. "You are too young, my Henrik," he whispered, his voice tinged with regret. "I will protect you until you are ready." With that, Michael stepped back, looking over his children. His gaze lingered on each of them, his love for them evident, even as the poison claimed their lives. They would be stronger. They would survive. But the cost was one he could never undo. As his children succumbed to the magic, Esther's heart twisted in her chest. She could feel their essence changing. "Forgive me," she whispered, but the words were lost in the weight of what had been done. The price of their immortality had been sealed in blood and magic. And now, there was no turning back. The flames in the hearth flickered unevenly, casting jagged shadows that danced across the cold stone walls. The chamber was thick with an unbearable tension, a suffocating silence punctuated only by the occasional crackle of firewood. The newly awakened Mikaelsons were gathered, their unnatural stillness a sharp contrast to the roiling emotions within them. The air carried a pungent mix of scents, blood, ash, and the faint tang of herbs lingering from Esther's spellwork. But nothing in the room held their attention more than the still form of Vali, lying motionless on the altar. Mikaelsson leaned heavily against the wall, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of the moment were pressing him into the stone. His arms were crossed tightly, a futile attempt to shield himself from the agonizing sight before him. Rebecca, her golden hair tangled and her cheeks streaked with tears, stood at the edge of the altar. Her hands trembled as they hovered over Vali's chest, unwilling to touch him, as though the act would confirm the worst. Cole paced restlessly, his boots striking the stone with uneven rhythm. His fingers twitched at his sides, the energy of his new existence surging uncontrollably through him. Elijah stood apart from the others, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched. His dark eyes burned with a cold fury that promised violence should the truth reveal itself to be as bleak as they feared. Finally, it was Elijah who broke the oppressive silence. "Why isn't he waking?" His voice was calm, but the barely suppressed urgency beneath it sent a ripple through the room. Michael, standing at the head of the altar, opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. His hands trembled as they rested on the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white with strain. He glanced at Elijah, his expression betraying a flicker of doubt he had never allowed himself to show before. "He was the last to fall," Michael said finally, his voice quiet and strained. "Perhaps his spirit requires more time." "Requires more time?" Cole's voice was sharp, incredulous. We all felt it the moment the spell took hold. We rose together, stronger, faster, alive in ways we've never known. "Vala should be awake. He should be with us." Rebecca shook her head, her voice trembling as she spoke. Maybe something went wrong. She looked at her mother, her eyes wide and desperate. "Mother, is he Dash? Can he?" Esther stepped forward slowly, her hands twisting in the folds of her dress. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with the shadows of exhaustion and something darker, guilt. "I don't know," she whispered. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Niklaus's head snapped up, his fury spilling over. "You don't know?" he hissed, pushing off the wall. "You did this to us. You made us into these monsters. How can you not know?" Esther recoiled, her hands rising defensively. The spell was experimental. I had to dash to what? Niklaus's voice rose, his anger echoing off the walls. "Sacrifice him for your twisted rituals? What did you do, Mother?" "It's the mark," Esther said, her voice trembling. "The mark?" Rebecca's brow furrowed. "The one on his arm? What does that have to do with anything?" Esther hesitated, her gaze darting to Michael. "It was never a simple birthmark," she said softly. "I've always known it wasn't natural. I told your father, but he refused to listen. What are you saying, Esther? Michael's voice was low, dangerous. It's cursed, she admitted, her voice breaking. From the day he was born, I felt its darkness. I tried to protect him, to protect us, but the mark carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Mikaelson's fists clenched, his voice shaking with rage. And what did you do? What did you try to do? Esther's face crumpled as she confessed, her voice a broken whisper. I tried to rid us of it. Of him. The room erupted. Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Cole's pacing halted as he stared at his mother in disbelief. Mikaelson's roar of fury echoed through the chamber, but it was Michael who silenced them all. You tried to kill him, Michael said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. His hands balled into fists at his sides, his body trembling. The accidents, the illnesses, all those times he nearly died. That was you. Esther sobbed, nodding. I thought it was the only way to save our family. The mark, it was a harbinger of death. I was desperate, Dash. You poisoned him. Michael's shout was raw, guttural. He was our son, and you condemned him. Michael, realization sinking in, sank to his knees beside Vala's body, his trembling hands reaching out to touch his son's chest. The coldness of Vala's skin made him recoil, a strangled cry tearing from his throat as his fingers hovered just above the lifeless form. His son, his boy, so still, so cold. Michael's trembling hands hovered over Vala's cold chest, the memories still flooding his mind, each one more painful than the last. He saw Vala's young face, filled with admiration as they sparred together. You'll make a fine warrior, my son, Michael had said, lifting Vali high in the air, a rare moment of joy shared between father and son. But the memories grew darker, cutting through the warmth of the past like a jagged blade. He saw Vala lying in his sickbed once again, pale and feverish. The boy's body seemed too fragile to survive the relentless cycle of sickness. He'd spent weeks at a time in bed, unable to hold a sword, unable to run, unable to even speak clearly without coughing. Yet, no matter how many doctors they called in, no matter what remedies they tried, Vala's body was slow to heal. And when he did, the illnesses returned, each one more crippling than the last. The tension between them had begun to grow, small at first, but enough to cloud their once close relationship. Vali, growing older and more aware, had begun to question what was happening to him. His once bright eyes had started to show signs of pain, of confusion, of betrayal. Michael could hear the words now, like they were spoken only yesterday, his son's voice trembling with hurt and disbelief. You never believed me, did you? Vali had accused, his voice raw with years of suffering. The fevers, the weakness, the accidents. Do you know how it feels to have your own mother want to kill you? Michael had stood frozen in the moment, unable to fathom the words. Vali, don't be foolish, he had replied, a harshness to his tone, yet also an undercurrent of fear. Your mother would never dash, but Vali had cut him off, his face pale, his voice cracking. You don't see it, do you? All these years, all these things that happened to me, they weren't accidents, father. They weren't just illnesses. She did it. She poisoned me with her magic, just like she poisoned herself. She wanted me dead. Michael had shaken his head in denial, his chest tightening with the unbearable weight of his son's accusation. That's not true, Michael had insisted, his voice rising in defense of Esther, as it always had. Your mother loves you. She would never harm you. But the doubt had begun to take root, despite Michael's desperate insistence. The shadows in Vala's eyes, the ones that never disappeared after his illnesses, the way he had spoken of Esther with so much fear, with so much bitterness. These things had begun to gnaw at Michael's certainty. He had refused to consider it, unwilling to look beyond the life he had built with Esther. He had chosen to believe in her, to trust her, because if he didn't, if he even dared entertain the possibility that she had betrayed their son, everything he had fought for, everything he had built with her, would crumble. He had clung to that belief, even as Vala's body grew weaker, even as the accusations began to haunt him. But he had always silenced the growing voice in his head that told him maybe Vali was right. Now, as Michael knelt before Vala's lifeless body, the weight of his son's words hit him like a wave, drowning him in guilt. The fog of years of faith in Esther, in her love, in her promises was lifting. For the first time, Michael could see the truth. Esther had been lying. She had poisoned Vali, sabotaging his health for reasons Michael could never understand. The illnesses, the fevers, the accidents. All the things he had dismissed as coincidences, all the moments where he had ignored Vala's pain, now made sense. You decided to finish it yourself? Finally decided to join Mother in her quest to kill me? All these years, her poisons and curses failing. And the one person I thought loved me most is the one who kills me. I was the abomination, wasn't I? The echo of his son's final words shattered his heart. Now that Esther had confessed, her voice thick with guilt, it all became clear. Her words fell like stones in Michael's mind, each one sinking deeper into his heart. I thought it was the only way to save us, Esther whispered, broken and tearful, her face pale and twisted with regret. The mark on him, it was always a sign, Michael. A curse. I knew that from the moment he was born. Michael turned to her in stunned silence, unable to speak as the true horror of her words sank in. For all these years, for all of their struggles, for all the sickness that had ravaged his son, he had been blind. She had done it. She had orchestrated it all. Esther trembled as she spoke, her voice shaking with a raw, twisted sorrow. I never wanted this to happen. But the mark, it was too much. The darkness was always there. I had to protect our family. I thought if he died, everything would be all right. We would be safe. Michael felt as if the world was crashing down around him, the foundation of his entire life, his family, shaking beneath his feet. He had been too blinded by his faith in Esther, by his love for her. He had trusted her completely, ignored all the signs of her betrayal. And now, standing here, with his son's cold body before him, Michael realized the truth. Esther had taken him. She had wanted him gone, all because of the mark. Vali was never the problem. The mark was just a symbol, a sign of who he was, of what she feared. She had tried to destroy him for it. His fists clenched, the guilt coursing through his veins like fire. The years of neglect, of turning a blind eye, of silencing his own doubts had led to this. He had condemned his son to a slow, agonizing death. And for what? His faith in a woman who had betrayed him, betrayed his family. I killed him, Michael realized, his thought barely a whisper. I was the one who betrayed him. He had been so certain, so unwavering in his trust of Esther, that he had allowed the poison to take root, allowing her to destroy their son, all while convincing himself that everything was fine. Michael's body trembled as he sat beside Vala's corpse, his face buried in his hands. The tears fell freely now, his heart breaking in the silence of the chamber. Why didn't I see it? He thought, his mind spiraling into despair. Why didn't I protect you, Vali? He had never wanted this, never wanted to hurt his son, never wanted to betray him. But now, as he sat in the aftermath, the painful truth was undeniable. He had allowed Esther to take everything from him, from Vali, from their family. And now, the boy who had been his pride, his joy, his heart, was gone. Michael's gaze drifted toward the still form of Vali, and in that moment, the cold stone of the altar felt like a heavy weight pressing down on him. His son, his boy, was gone, and there was nothing Michael could do to undo the horrors that had unfolded. The guilt, the shame, the regret, it all crashed over him with unrelenting force. And as his tears soaked into the cold stone, Michael made a vow, one that burned through the ache in his chest. I will make this right, no matter the cost. I will bring you back, Vali. The room was silent save for Michael's cries, the siblings frozen in their own anguish. When Michael finally rose, his face was a mask of fury, his gaze locked on Esther, cold and unrelenting. If he does not awaken, you will wish you had never drawn breath. Elijah stepped forward, his voice trembling. We need answers, not threats. If there's a way to bring him back, we must find it. The fire crackled ominously at Elijah's words, its light casting monstrous shadows over the broken family. The Mikaelsons stood on the brink, their grief threatening to consume them. Yet, for a moment, maybe there was hope for more. But it was only for a moment, for it was immediately crushed. No, Michael, Esther began. I am sorry, but I will not. Esther stated, her voice filled with grief, yet firm. At her words, Michael's mind was unraveling. Each memory, each confession, a jagged shard lodged deep within his chest. His hands, once steady and strong, now trembled with an insatiable fury. He could feel his heart pounding in his ears as he slowly rose to his feet, his gaze never leaving Esther. His soul, shredded by guilt and the painful weight of truth, was consumed by rage. She had done it. She had destroyed everything he had built. The realization burned through him like wildfire. Every ounce of pain, every bitter accusation Vali had made echoed in his mind. All of it was true. And now, all of it had shattered Michael's world. Without warning, he strode toward Esther, his body shaking with fury and grief. His vision blurred with hot tears, but the rage in his chest cleared his mind. "You!" Michael's voice cracked with raw emotion as he lunged toward her, his hands outstretched, ready to wrap around her throat. "You killed him. You destroyed him. And you dare to refuse to rectify your sins." Esther flinched back, her wide eyes filled with fear and regret. But she didn't move to flee. She only stood there, trembling, hands raised in a futile gesture of defense. Michael was faster, too consumed with grief to hesitate. His hands grabbed her by the shoulders, lifting her off the ground with a strength born from years of rage and torment. His breath came in jagged gasps as he pulled her close, his face twisted with the agony of betrayal. "You poisoned him." Michael spat, shaking her like a rag doll. "You took my son away from me, and now you will bring him back. You will bring him back, or I will make you suffer in ways inexplicable even to your deranged mind." Which? Esther's body trembled in his grasp, but she didn't speak. She didn't try to fight back. Her face was pale, the weight of her guilt almost too much for her to bear. And then, her voice, soft and broken, emerged in a whisper. "I'm sorry, Michael," she pleaded, her eyes pleading with him. "I never wanted this. I never wanted him to die. I thought dash," but Michael's fury drowned her words. "You thought." He threw her violently against the stone wall, sending her crumpling to the ground, gasping for air. The moment she hit the cold stone, the room seemed to grow colder still, the shadows stretching unnaturally, as if responding to his rage. "You lied to me," Michael bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. "You deceived me for years. You used me. You killed him." He advanced on her again, but as he took another step toward Esther, the air seemed to shift. A strange pressure filled the room, an oppressive weight that pressed against his chest and made it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and Michael froze, his hand reaching for his sword in reflex. He felt something in the air, something ancient and heavy, pressing against him. He turned toward the others, but they were all motionless, their eyes wide with the same confusion and growing fear. Then a low, chilling sound echoed from the very walls of the chamber. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the fire crackling in the hearth. It was the sound of something far older, far more powerful, whispering in the shadows. "Mikael." The voice was an ethereal whisper, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all directions. His blood ran cold as the air seemed to warp and bend, a swirl of unnatural energy gathering in the center of the room, coalescing around Esther. Michael's grip tightened on his sword, his knuckles white with rage. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice trembling with anger and confusion. Esther looked up, her eyes wide, and then Michael saw it. The flicker of something in her gaze, something beyond the sorrow, beyond the regret. Her lips moved, a soft incantation, one that seemed to vibrate in the air like a living thing. The whispering voices, rising with an eerie force, grew louder. "Michael, stop!" Esther's voice trembled as the power around her seemed to increase. She held up her hand, not in defense, but in surrender, as if to contain the force that surrounded her. A blinding light began to glow around Esther, an unnatural aura that seemed to protect her. The ancient energy, the presence of something far beyond the mortal world, coiled around her like a shroud. The walls trembled, and the stone beneath their feet seemed to shift. "No!" Michael shouted, lunging forward, his sword raised. But as he made contact with the glowing aura, the sword was ripped from his hand, the very air around him crackling with power. It was as if an invisible barrier had thrown him back with the force of storm, sending him crashing to the cold stone floor. The sound of the ancient voices grew louder still, the room now trembling with the force of something Michael could not comprehend. It felt as though the very air was alive, bending to an ancient will, one that was not his own. The spirits of their ancestors, the ones Esther had called upon long ago, had come to her aid. The power of the spirits that had once protected their bloodline now surged through her, and Michael could do nothing but watch in helpless fury. "You cannot harm her," the voices whispered in unison, an ancient and terrifying chorus that seemed to echo in his very bones. "She is shielded." Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet, but the force of the spirit's power held him in place, as if frozen in time. He could feel his strength waning, his body trembling under the weight of their influence. The power of the ancestors was vast, ancient, and unyielding. "No," Michael gasped, his voice filled with frustration and disbelief. He tried to move, tried to fight the pull of the spirits, but it was futile. The magic surrounding Esther was beyond his reach, beyond his understanding. Esther, her face twisted in anguish and sorrow, spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "I never wanted this, Michael. You don't understand." But Michael could hear nothing beyond the deafening roar of the ancestors' power. The ancient spirits had risen to protect her, to shield her from his wrath. And in that moment, Michael realized the true extent of his impotence. He had wanted to destroy her, to punish her for the loss of his son. But the forces that had been awakened were too powerful, too far beyond his control. Mikaelsons himself, alongside his siblings, stood frozen in the midst of the chaos, his eyes burning with rage as his father and mother clashed in the center of the room. The power of the ancestor spirits kept Michael at bay, their invisible hands forcing him back every time he lunged toward Esther. But Mikaelsons didn't care for their battle. His mind was consumed with a far deeper, more agonizing thought. Vali, his brother, his ally, his family, was dead, and no amount of anger or power could bring him back. His fists clenched at his sides, his body trembling with a violent storm of emotions that churned inside him. He could feel it, the helplessness clawing at his chest, the bitter realization that his brother, the one who had stood by him when no one else would, was lost to them. The loss was unbearable. It was an ache that sliced through his bones, leaving him empty, furious, and, worst of all, broken. Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Something inside him, something primal and ancient, surged to the surface. It was an instinct, one that told him to move. Without thinking, Mikaelsons spun on his heel, his gaze searching the cavernous room for something, anything, that might offer him a sliver of hope. His eyes fell upon a shadowed corner of the cave, half hidden by the flickering shadows of the hearth. There, propped up against the wall, was a weapon. It was a jagged blade, a crude but lethal weapon fashioned from a donkey's jawbone. His heart skipped a beat as memories flooded his mind. It had been a gift from their father to Vali. The moment Michael had given it to him, it had been a moment of pride for the boy, but also an unspoken moment of defiance. Vali had insisted on it. He had always said that he wanted a donkey's jawbone, not just for the sake of its brutal aesthetic, but because of the dreams that had plagued him. Dreams of battle, of conquest, of something greater than anything he could grasp at that time. Dreams that no one, least of all their mother, had wished to indulge. Esther had called them foolish, an omen of destruction. She had said nothing good would come from his obsessions, his strange, dark dreams. But their father, in his infinite pride, had indulged Vali, agreeing to have the bone carved into a blade. Mikaelsons could still hear their arguments. Vali had begged, argued, demanded the weapon that would carry him to greatness, and Michael, stubborn and proud, had finally relented. The blade had become an extension of Vali. It had been his primary weapon, the one he always carried with him, no matter where he went or how far he had come. Even in battle, even in war, it had been the donkey's jawbone that had been Vali's trusted companion. Only after years of Michael's insistence had Vali reluctantly accepted a more practical weapon, a battle axe. But even then, he never went anywhere without the jawbone blade tucked into his belt. The memories rushed back, sharp and biting, and in that moment, Mikaelsons' instincts guided him, allowing him to know exactly what he had to do. He crossed the room in long, hurried strides, his hand closing around the jagged blade, the bone still warm to the touch from where it had been left. He stared at it for a moment, feeling a deep surge of loss and yearning. His big brother, the one who had always defended him, who had fought by his side, was gone. And yet, this blade could be the key to bringing him back. He ran his fingers along the rough edge of the bone, his heart pounding in his chest. Without thinking, he turned and walked toward the stone altar where Vala's body lay still and cold. His mind was flooded with desperation as he knelt beside his brother, placing the donkey's jawbone blade gently into Vala's right hand. As the blade made contact with Vala's cold fingers, something strange and inexplicable happened. The mark on Vala's arm, the same one that had haunted their family for so many years, the mark their mother had always feared, began to flare with an intense red light. The darkness that had once consumed it seemed to pulse with life again, the ancient curse that had marked Vali since birth stirring, awakening as if responding to the presence of the weapon that had been so dear to him. Mikaelsons gasped, drawing his siblings' attention. His heart thudded in his chest as he watched the red glow expand, its warmth spreading like fire through Vala's veins. The mark was alive. It was pulsing with power, and for the briefest moment, it felt as though Vali was reaching out, calling to him from beyond the grave. A flicker of hope sparked inside Mikaelsons. He stood slowly, his fingers trembling as he looked at his brother, at the life that was beginning to stir again. His emotions were overwhelming now. Grief, rage, fear, but above all, hope. He looked to the heavens, his voice trembling but filled with the raw intensity of his heart. "Vali," Mikaelsons whispered, though his voice quickly grew louder, more resolute. "I know we've had our differences. I know we fought, and I know you didn't always understand me. But damn it, you're my brother. You're my blood, the one who always had my back when no one else did. You're the one who stood by me when they all turned away. You were the one who fought for me when no one else would." His voice cracked, the grief threatening to drown him, but he fought it back. His eyes burned with tears that wouldn't fall, not now. Not when he was so close to having his brother back. "You must come back, Vali," he growled, his voice full of the fierce conviction that had always driven him. "You cannot stay in the darkness. You cannot leave us like this. Death is for cowards, and you were never a coward. You fought for life. You fought for us." Mikaelsons felt the fire in his chest grow stronger as the mark continued to flare up, the pulsing heat in his brother's hand seeming to answer him. His body quivered with energy, pure, untapped potential that surged through his veins like a storm. "You are the one who taught me to never back down. You are the one who showed me that blood is thicker than anything else. So come back, Vali." His voice broke at the end, the desperation and raw emotion crashing over him like a wave. "Come back for us. For me. You're not done yet, big brother. You can't be." For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth, as if mocking him. But then, just then, the mark flared brighter. A pulse of energy seemed to ignite through the blade, and Mikaelsons took a deep breath, his chest heaving. Was it working? Was this the moment? Could this truly be the turning point? Mikaelsons' heart surged with anticipation. This wasn't the end. Not for Vali. Not yet. And so, to everyone's shock, even Esther, Michael, and the ancestral spirits who had stopped when they began hearing Klaus's words, Vala's eyes shot open, pure black. The moment Vala's eyes snapped open, two lives crashed together in his mind like colliding stars. Memories flooded back, not just of growing up as a Mikaelson, but of a modern world filled with technology, entertainment, and most importantly, knowledge of what was to come. The irony wasn't lost on him. Being reborn into one of his favorite TV shows only to become exactly what he'd watched countless times. The best way he could describe what it was like is akin to someone knowing a thing, forgetting it, doing something, and when almost done remembering that thing, being a bit annoyed that they forgot it and didn't factor it in earlier. But in this case, it is a whole lifetime of memories that were forgotten and now remembered. Distracting himself from all that could have been, his pure black eyes surveyed the room, taking in details with newfound clarity. The mark on his arm pulsing with crimson energy, each beat sending waves of ancient power through his transformed body. The familiar weight of the jawbone blade in his hand felt right, destined even, though this version was still incomplete compared to what he knew it could become. The hybrid nature of his existence fascinated him. He could feel both the predatory hunger of vampirism and the darker urges of a knight of hell combining within him, akin to a hand and a perfectly fitting glove. Two supernatural forces that should never have merged, yet here they were, bound together by his unique circumstances. Rising from the altar in one fluid motion, his movements carried an unnatural grace despite the lingering wound in his chest that was already closing up. The protective glow of ancestral spirits around Esther drew his attention, their ethereal forms shifting uneasily as his gaze fell upon them. He could see them, their very souls. "Mother," he spoke, his voice a low growl that seemed to echo with otherworldly harmonics. "It seems you have failed once more." Esther's eyes widened with recognition and terror. This was what she had feared since his birth, the darkness she had sensed taking physical form. "What are you?" she whispered. Vala's lips curled into a cold smile. "I am your greatest failure, the son you tried so desperately to destroy, now transformed into something far beyond your worst nightmares." The ancestral spirits swirled more violently around Esther, their whispers growing urgent. But Vala could sense their fear. They recognized the mark as a power older than their own, a curse formed from power that preceded even their ancient magics. "The spirits cannot save you," Vala continued, taking a step forward. "They know they're powerless against what I am now. Their very souls shudder in my presence. I can see it." Michael stood frozen, watching the exchange with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. His earlier rage at Esther temporarily forgotten as he tried to comprehend his son's return, joy and relief beginning to bloom within his heart. "Brother," Niklaus spoke softly, drawing Vala's attention. "You've returned to us." Vala turned to his siblings, his black eyes softening slightly. Despite everything, despite the memories of another life, despite his transformation, these were still his family. He had lived this life, loved them, protected them. That hadn't changed. His vampiric nature heightened his love more than demonichood could dampen. "I have," he replied, his voice losing some of its otherworldly edge. "And I remember everything, Niklaus. Every betrayal, every attempt on my life." His gaze shifted back to Esther. "Every poison." The mark flared brighter, responding to his rising anger. The jawbone blade hummed with dark energy, eager to taste blood. But Vali held himself in check. There would be time for vengeance later. First, he needed to understand the full extent of what he had become. "The mark protects its own," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "That's why your poisons never worked, Mother. Why I always survived. It was never going to let me die so easily." Esther's voice trembled as she spoke. "The mark is a curse, a darkness that should never have been born into this world. I only tried to protect our family - protect." Vala's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You try to murder your own child. You poison me, curse me, turn my own father against me with your lies." His eyes flickered to Michael, though he bears his own guilt in this. Michael flinched at the accusation, but didn't deny it. The weight of his choices, his blind trust in Esther, pressed down on him like a physical force. "But now," Vala continued, "now I am something new, something that never should have existed." He flexed his hand around the jawbone blade, feeling its power resonating with the mark. Something even I am yet to fully understand. The implications of his transformation hung heavy in the air. He was no longer just an original vampire like his siblings. The mark had changed things, merged with Esther's spell to create something unprecedented, something dangerous. As Vala's gaze swept across his siblings once more, it caught on something that made his black eyes narrow, a necklace around Niklaus's throat, seemingly innocent but radiating with suppressive magic. He could feel its power now with his enhanced senses, recognize its purpose even if its effects hadn't yet manifested fully. With his memories returned, he now understood why his instincts always warred within him against Niklaus. Why, even though he loved him, even though he was the only one who protected him from their father, while the rest watched in fear and did not allow it to become nearly as bad as in the original timeline, he still felt him wrong, disgusted by his presence. Feeling it a lie, one greater than all. For it was a lie. His mother's cruel tricks to hide her greatest shame. Interesting, Valis said softly, his voice carrying across the silent cave. Tell me, Mother, why does Niklaus wear that particular necklace? I couldn't see it before, but now I can see exactly the magic woven in it. Its strings are quite peculiar, almost like chains surrounding him. Tell me, what are you trying to suppress within my brother? The atmosphere in the cave shifted instantly. Niklaus's hand flew to his throat, fingers brushing against the pendant he'd worn for as long as he could remember. What do you mean, suppress? Niklaus demanded, his voice tight with confusion and growing anger. Esther's face paled further, the ancestral spirits around her flickering agitatedly. It's merely a protection charm, Dash. No. Vali cut her off, his tone sharp. Don't lie. I already told you. I can see it. There's something else. Something you're hiding. He tilted his head, studying with even more concentration the magical signatures with his newfound senses. Michael stepped forward, his earlier rage finding new focus. What have you done? Nothing. Esther protested, but her voice wavered. The necklace is for protection, nothing more. Then you won't mind if I remove it, Niklaus growled, his fingers already working at the clasp. No. Esther's cry was desperate, causing everyone to freeze. The ancestral spirits swirled more violently around her, responding to her distress. Mother, Niklaus's voice was dangerously quiet. Why? Please, Esther whispered. You don't understand, Dash. Then help us understand, Michael demanded, his voice like thunder. What are you hiding about our son? The word "our" seemed to break something in Esther. Her shoulders slumped, and tears began streaming down her face. Not our son, she whispered, the words barely audible. The cave fell into devastating silence. Michael's face went completely still, while Niklaus looked as though he'd been struck. What did you say? Michael's voice was deadly quiet. I am sorry, Esther sobbed. I'm so sorry. I was weak. The necklace, it's meant to suppress his other nature, the one he inherited from his true father. The confession hung in the air like a physical thing, heavy and poisonous. Vali watched as understanding dawned on both Michael and Niklaus's faces, their expressions transforming from confusion to horror to rage. Who? Michael's single word carried the weight of decades of betrayal. One of the werewolf villagers, Esther admitted, her voice breaking. I couldn't bear the shame. The necklace was meant to hide what he might become, to protect him from the truth. Niklaus stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. Everything he'd known, everything he'd believed about himself, was being stripped away with each word his mother spoke. The mark on Vala's arm pulsed with dark satisfaction. The truth was out now, exposed in the worst possible way. But at least it had come from Esther's own lips, when Michael's hatred was already focused on her betrayals. His rage had a clear target, one far from his little brother. This, alongside his gratitude towards Klaus, and his already past experiences with the true extremity of his ways. Vala's very existence embodying it, casting doubt within Michael's heart, would make it so. His younger brother is not the target of their father's wrath. Esther's composure suddenly shattered, her face contorting with a wild desperation as she backed against the cave wall. The ancestral spirits around her pulsed erratically, responding to her heightened emotional state. But it is not fully my fault, Esther began, her voice rising hysterically as she jabbed an accusatory finger at Michael. Her normally composed features were twisted with a manic energy, her eyes wide and unfocused. You are as much to blame as me, Michael. You never listened to me. She whirled toward Vali, her entire body trembling with hatred. Her fingers curled into claws as she pointed at him, spittle flying from her lips as she shrieked. You took that thing in and did not understand that he had to be put down. Vala's black eyes gleamed with dark amusement, his lips curling into a knowing smirk that only seemed to fuel her hysteria. The mark on his arm pulsed rhythmically, as if enjoying the show. Look now what he has become. She pressed herself further against the wall, her voice cracking with fear and revulsion. Her hands clawed at her own dress as she continued, growing more frenzied with each word. You neglected me and my worries, and when Freya was taken from us, you shut me out even more. Tears streamed down her face now, but they were tears of rage rather than sorrow. The ancestral spirits swirled more violently around her as she screamed her final accusation. If you never did that, none of this would have happened. The echo of her words reverberated through the cave, leaving a heavy silence in their wake, causing the tension in the cave only to grow thicker. Vala's black eyes flickered between his mother and father, watching his decades of lies and betrayal crystallized into this singular moment. You dare speak of blame? Michael's voice was deadly quiet, a stark contrast to Esther's hysteria. His hand trembled on the hilt of his sword, knuckles white with restraint. You dare speak of protection while you stand there, shielded by your spirits, after confessing to attempting to murder our son for years on end and betraying our marriage bed? The ancestral spirits swirled more frantically around Esther, their ethereal forms casting eerie shadows on the cave walls. Vala could see their anxiety, their growing uncertainty as the weight of Esther's crimes became clear. The spirits may protect you from physical harm, Mother, Vala said, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the very air vibrate. But they cannot shield you from the consequences of your actions. Not anymore. He stepped forward, placing himself between Niklaus and their parents. The mark on his arm pulsed with renewed intensity, responding to his protective instinct. The jawbone blade in his hand hummed with dark energy, eager for blood, but held in check by its master's will. You speak of my darkness, he continued, his black eyes fixed on Esther. Yet you are the one who has brought nothing but pain and betrayal to this family. You poisoned your own child. You betrayed your husband. You bound Niklaus's true nature, forcing him to live a lie. Niklaus stood behind him, still processing the revelation of his true parentage. His hands had fallen from the necklace, hanging limply at his sides as the weight of truth pressed down on him. Everything, Vala's voice grew colder. Every moment of suffering in this family can be traced back to your lies, Mother. Your fear, your weakness. The mark flared brighter, its crimson glow casting strange shadows across the cave walls. The ancestral spirits seemed to recoil from its light, their forms becoming more transparent as if trying to fade away from what they knew was coming. Vali approached Esther with deliberate slowness, each step measured and calm. His black eyes studied her with an almost clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. The jawbone blade hung loosely in his grip, deceptively casual. You know, Mother, he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, I've spent years wondering why the mark chose me, why it appeared on my arm the day I was born. He flexed his fingers around the blade's handle, feeling its resonance with his being. But now I understand. It wasn't about destiny or fate. It was about rage. The ancestral spirits flickered uncertainly around Esther, their ethereal forms wavering as they sensed something ancient and terrible in Vala's presence, something they couldn't comprehend. Pure, unadulterated hatred, he continued, his voice still maintaining that eerily calm tone, the kind that can tame the evils of creation and subdue them within one's own soul. The rage that can only be fueled more by a mother repeatedly trying to murder her own child. He was close enough now to see the fear in Esther's eyes, to watch as she pressed herself further against the cave wall. The spirit's protective barrier pulsed erratically, weakening as their confusion and terror grew. Then, in a flash, everything changed. Vala's carefully maintained composure shattered, replaced by centuries of bottled rage. His black eyes blazed with an unholy fire as he lunged forward, driving the jawbone blade deep into Esther's heart. In the split second the spirit's protection faltered. "This is for every poison," he snarled, twisting the blade. "Every curse, every lie." The mark on his arm erupted in crimson light, responding to his hatred, his fury, his pain. The blade remained unchanged in appearance, still the crude weapon fashioned from a donkey's jawbone. But its essence, its aura, began to shift. This wasn't just matricide, it was completion. His hatred, his darkness, flowing into the weapon, making it truly his. Esther gasped, her eyes wide with shock and understanding too late. Blood trickled from her lips as she stared at her son, at what she had created through her own actions. "Vali," she whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I am what you made me," he growled, pushing the blade deeper. "Every dark thought, every violent urge. You cultivated them all with your attempts to destroy me. And now they're going to destroy you." The mark pulsed one final time, and the blade in his hands transformed completely. Where before it had hummed with potential, now it resonated with absolute power. The simple bone structure remained the same, but anyone with acute enough senses could feel the change. The weapon had become something more, something terrible and perfect, not through physical transformation, but through the infusion of Vala's pure, unfiltered hatred. Esther's body went limp, sliding down the cave wall as the light faded from her eyes. The ancestral spirits scattered in terror, their protection shattered along with their confidence. Vali stood over his mother's corpse, the completed blade dripping with her blood. He could feel its power now, fully awakened and bound to him alone. This was his weapon, forged in matricide rather than fratricide, powered by a hatred that was purely his own, rather that of a vengeful goddess, and yet his rage formed the same. The blade that could sever any thread of life God has woven. The cave fell into stunned silence as Esther's body slumped to the ground. The ancestral spirits scattered like leaves in a storm, their protection shattered by an act they never saw coming. The crude jawbone blade, still buried in Esther's chest, pulsed with newfound power though its appearance remained unchanged. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Finn, devastated. Elijah, standing frozen, his usual composure cracked by the brutality of what he'd just witnessed. Cole's face a mixture of awe and fear, his magical knowledge allowing him to sense the profound change in the blade's essence. But it was Michael and Niklaus's reactions that truly stood out. Michael's face bore a dark look, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes as he watched his wife's body grow cold. The woman who had poisoned his son, who had betrayed their marriage bed, who had twisted their family with lies, was finally paying for her sins. Niklaus, the necklace now lying broken at his feet where he'd torn it off during Vala's attack, shared a similar expression of grim pleasure. His hands were still shaking, but there was relief in his eyes. Relief at being freed from his mother's magical chains. Relief at seeing her pay for her deceptions. The mark on Vala's arm pulsed one final time, settling into a steady crimson glow as the blade's transformation completed. The weapon radiating undeniable power, a perfect extension of Vala's darkness, forged not through external forces, but through his own pure hatred. The cave remained silent still, save for the soft drip of blood from the blade's tip. No one moved, no one spoke. They all simply stared at what had transpired, at the son who had killed his mother, at the weapon that had been completed through that terrible act. And in that silence, Vala smiled, knowing that he now, after ripping it out of his mother's chest, held in his hands a weapon that could kill anything in creation. All it had taken was embracing the darkness his mother had always feared he possessed. With Esther's body cooling at his feet and the ancestral spirits scattered like mist before a storm, Vali turned his attention to the cave's entrance. Shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom, creating golden columns in the morning air. The mark on his arm having calmed down, its crimson light having receded. His newly awakened memories provided an interesting hypothesis. Niklaus, in his unsealed hybrid form, had been immune to sunlight, a trait unique to him and his hybrids. The question now was whether Vala's own hybrid nature, the merger of vampire and knight of hell, would grant him similar protection. The jawbone blade, still slick with his mother's blood but now thrumming with power, hung loosely at his side as he approached the sunlight. His movements were deliberate, calculated, as he extended his hand toward the golden rays. The moment his fingers breached the threshold between shadow and light, searing pain shot through his flesh. He withdrew quickly, watching as the burns already began to heal, his skin knitting itself back together. Interesting, he mused, flexing his healed fingers. It seems my hybrid nature offers no protection from the sun. Perhaps because my transformation runs deeper than mere flesh. Unlike Mikaelsons, a fusion of soul and darkness rather than blood and curse. The mark pulsed again, as if in agreement with his assessment. This new existence would require careful testing to understand its full scope, both its powers and its limitations. "Father," Vali began, addressing Michael, who now stood before Esther's body, looking down on her, his expression complicated. "Has Mother said anything about any protection she had made for us against the sun?" Vali questioned. "The sun? Why would we need protection from a sun?" Rebecca questioned, confused, as she approached Henrik, who had thankfully still been asleep, because of the sleeping spell Esther had put on him to rest, having not witnessed his own brother kill their mother. "Oh, I see," Cole exclaimed. "The spell she used to turn us into these beasts-vampires," Vali interrupted. "Vampires?" Elijah questioned, confused and intrigued by the name choice. "The tribes to the east have a fascinating word in their tongue," Vali explained, his human black eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yupper, a term born from fear and superstition. They use it to describe creatures that have cheated death, beings that must feed on the living to maintain their immortality." He traced the mark on his arm absently as he continued. "It began as a slur against witches, actually. The Slavic people had countless tales of dark magic users who sought eternal life through consuming others' life force. Much like the stories Mother used to tell us of Silas and his dark pursuits of immortality." His lips curved into a slight smile. "Arnor's tongue shares roots with theirs, and the word evolved in our lands to vampire or vampiri. Though personally," he added with a touch of dark humor, "I prefer the simpler form, vampire. It has a certain finality to it, don't you think? You wish to name us after an insult?" Niklaus spoke for the first time since their mother's death, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of all revelations still pressed heavily on him. Vala's black eyes gleamed with dark amusement. "Words are merely tools, brother. Their power lies not in their origin, but in how they're wielded." He ran his fingers along the jawbone blade, still warm with their mother's blood. "And I promise you, in time, this word will be whispered in fear around every hearth from here to the ends of the earth. Vampire will become synonymous with power, with immortality." His lips curved into a predatory smile. "Let them try to insult what they fear to name." "As fascinating as this etymology lesson is," Rebecca cut in, her voice sharp with barely contained irritation, "I believe our brother Cole has noticed something far more pressing." She turned to Cole, her eyes bright with intensity. "Haven't you, brother?" Cole's lips curved into a knowing smile, pleased at being the center of attention. "Indeed, sister." As I was about to say, Cole began, his eyes alight with the excitement of magical discovery. "Our transformations aren't just physical. Mother's spell, it's unlike anything I've ever encountered in my studies of magic. The way it's woven through our very essence." He paused, glancing at Vali. "Well, most of our essences. Our brother here seems to have taken a rather unique path." His fingers traced patterns in the air as he spoke, a habit he developed during his magical studies. "The spell didn't just make us immortal. It fundamentally changed what we are. Nature itself has been forced to acknowledge us as something new, something it never intended to exist. And nature," he added with a grim smile, "always demands balance." "What is that balance based on, Cole?" Elijah questioned, he himself never having been enthusiastic about magic, unlike Finn and Cole, having deemed to obey father's wishes and not be defiant like his other siblings. Before Cole could answer, Finn spoke up, his voice heavy with both grief and understanding. He'd always been closest to their mother, sharing her affinity for magic, but even he couldn't deny the horror of her actions. The balance, brother, Finn said softly, his eyes distant, is based on what we take from nature. Every gift exacts a price. He glanced at their mother's body, his expression torn between love and betrayal. Mother, she understood this better than anyone. That's why the spell bound us with such specific weaknesses. The sun that gives life burns us because we defy death. And if I reason well, vervain, the plant will weaken us because we mock nature's order, while the white oak can end us because it gave us life. It is what I believe she must have done, for even in this state, I can still sense the magic within the white oak flow through our veins. Inaccessible. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. She made us monsters, yes, but even in that, she ensured we would remain bound by nature's laws. Perhaps that was her final act of love. The last word came out bitter, uncertain. Niklaus scoffed. That woman cared about nothing but her damn self and her precious nature. She never loved us, his tone full of bitterness and rage. Strange as it may seem, Vali interrupted, I must disagree. His words caused everyone to still, shock evident on their faces. The killer defending his victim. Mother's hatred was reserved solely for me. For the rest of you. He paused, running his fingers along the jawbone blade. She held genuine love, though it manifested differently for each. His lips curved into a bitter smile. I was the only one she truly feared, the only one she actively tried to destroy. The rest of you. He gestured to his siblings with his free hand. You were what she thought of during her desperate attempts to protect what she loved from what she saw as a darkness incarnate. Love, Klaus snarled, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Is that what you call it, brother? She bound my true nature with magic, made me live a lie my entire life. She let me suffer father's hatred while knowing the truth. He stalked forward, his eyes blazing. And now you stand here, over her corpse, speaking of her love? She was a manipulative witch who cared for nothing but her precious balance. Even her death was orchestrated, one final spell to turn us into monsters. So don't speak to me of her love, Vali. Not when every breath I've taken has been filtered through her lies. Hate you. Michael's voice cut through Klaus's tirade, causing everyone to fall silent. He turned from Esther's body to face Klaus, his expression complex. You think I hate you, boy? He stepped forward, his presence commanding as always, but there was something different in his eyes now. A weariness, perhaps even regret. Everything I did, every harsh word, every punishment, it was to forge you into something stronger. This world. He gestured to the cave entrance where sunlight still streamed in. It shows no mercy to the weak. I wanted you to be ready for it. His jaw clenched as he looked down at Esther's body. I was cruel, yes, but it was never hatred that drove me, Niklaus. It was fear. Fear that you would be too soft, too gentle for this harsh world. Like, he paused, pain flashing across his face, like Freya was. Klaus's eyes widened at Michael's words, disbelief warring with hope on his face. And now, he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Now that you know I'm not truly your son, that I'm the product of her betrayal, Michael scoffed, the sound holding more weariness than scorn. Not my son. He stepped closer to Klaus, his presence commanding but not threatening. I held you when you took your first steps. I taught you to wield a sword. I watched you grow from a boy who wept at killing rabbits into a man who shows mercy even to his enemies. His eyes flickered briefly to Vali. Blood is the least of what makes a father. The cave fell silent as the weight of Michael's words settled over them. This was not the same man who, in another life, might have hunted Klaus across centuries. Here, without Henrik's death to shatter them completely, without the need to find someone to blame, Michael's perspective had shifted over the years. Watching Vali embrace the warrior's path to its absolute extreme, becoming something that even Michael sometimes found disturbing, had gradually changed him. His second eldest son's unflinching brutality his complete embodiment of everything Mikael had once preached about strength, had served as a dark mirror. It made him see the value in Klaus's gentler nature, the strength and mercy that he had once mistaken for weakness. And now, with Esther's betrayal laid bare, all of Mikael's remaining rage had found its true target. The woman who had poisoned their son, who was unfaithful, who had twisted their family with lies. She alone would bear the weight of his hatred. Not that I am not happy with your words, Father, but I wish to return to the matter at hand, before everything digressed, Vali stated, his eyes fixed on the cave's entrance where sunlight still streamed in. Has Mother spoken of creating something against the weaknesses? Or at least against our weakness against the sun? I'd rather not live my entire immortal existence hiding in a day. I believe she spoke of rings that she would make. Mikael responded thoughtfully. Whether she has made them or not, we'll find out in her spell chamber. They waited until nightfall, the hours passing in tense silence as they processed everything that had happened. Henrik remained peacefully asleep, protected from the horror of their transformation and their mother's death by her final sleeping spell. When darkness finally fell, they made their way to Esther's hidden chamber, a small cave adjacent to their home where she practiced her craft. The space was filled with herbs, crystals, and grimoires, the air thick with a lingering scent of magic. Rebecca moved through the chamber, her enhanced vision allowing her to see clearly in the dim light. Her fingers traced over various scrolls and books until she found what appeared to be their mother's personal notes. Here, she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. These appear to be her latest workings. Cole practically snatched the papers from her hands, his eyes scanning the contents eagerly. His expression brightened as he read further. This is fascinating, he muttered, fingers tracing the magical formulas. She did create a solution for the sun, a spell to enchant rings, or any jewelry really, with the power to protect us from sunlight. He looked up at his siblings, excitement clear in his eyes. We'll need a specific stone, lapis lazuli, and there's an incantation. Can you perform it? Elijah asked, always practical. Cole's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. The spell requires a witch. He gestured to himself and his siblings. We've lost our connection to magic. It's part of nature's balance. We can't be both vampire and witch. Then we'll need to find someone we can trust, Vali stated, already expecting this, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. Someone who can help us claim the day as well as the night. Rebecca, Vali turned to his sister, his tone softening slightly. Stay with Henrik. He shouldn't wake alone, especially not to. He glanced at their mother's body, having brought it along with them. All of this. Rebecca nodded, her face a mix of relief and concern. She moved to Henrik's side, brushing his hair gently from his face. And where will you go? To Iana, Mikael answered, already moving toward the chamber's entrance. She's the only witch powerful enough to help us now, and trustworthy enough to keep our secret, Elijah added quietly. The siblings exchanged glances, understanding passing between them. They had all seen Iana's power, her wisdom. If anyone could help them master these new forms, it would be her. Be careful, Rebecca called after them as they prepared to leave. The night, it feels different now. Vali paused at the entrance, the jawbone blade gleaming dully in the moonlight. The night belongs to us now, sister, he said, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. It's everything else we need to be careful of. Speaking of being careful, Mikael interjected, his voice low and serious. Iana may not be as willing to help as we hope. She was your mother's closest friend, and she warned her against performing this spell. His eyes flickered to Vali. She also shares your mother's concerns about you, son. Her prejudices run just as deep. Then we'll have to be very persuasive, Vali replied. His eyes for a moment flicked black, glinting dangerously in the darkness, until they returned back to normal. With that, the brothers and their father stepped into the darkness, leaving Rebecca to her vigil. The moon hung full and bright above them as they made their way through the silent village toward Iana's dwelling, each step taking them closer to claiming their place in both darkness and light. But whether the powerful Bennett, which would help the creatures they had become, that remained to be seen. The moon hung heavy in the sky as the Mikaelsons made their way through the darkened village. "Are we certain about this?" Elijah asked, his voice low. Iana was Mother's closest friend. "We don't have much choice," Cole replied, fingering the grimoire pages they'd taken from their mother's chamber. "Unless you fancy spending eternity hiding from a son. She may not help us at all," Finn added quietly. "She warned Mother against this magic." Michael's jaw tightened. "She will help. She must. And if she refuses?" Niklaus questioned. "Then we'll have to be very persuasive," Vali answered, his black eyes gleaming in the darkness. They approached Iana's dwelling, the herbs and crystals surrounding it gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Before they could knock, the door creaked open, revealing the witch's stern face. "I sense your approach," she said, her eyes widening slightly as she took in their transformed appearance. "So Esther truly did it." "She did." Cole stepped forward smoothly, though she's currently indisposed. The spell had unexpected consequences when it came to Vali. The magical backlash. He trailed off meaningfully, producing a carefully crafted copy of their mother's notes. He'd spent the earlier hours meticulously transcribing them, leaving the originals safely with Rebecca. "These are her instructions for the daylight rings. Perhaps you could help us complete what she started." Iana's eyes narrowed, studying them carefully. "Come in," she said finally. "Let me see what can be done." The interior of her home was warm, thick with the scent of herbs and magic. She gestured for them to sit as she gathered materials. "The rings will take time to craft properly," she explained, laying out stones and herbs. "Lapis lazuli is temperamental. It must be prepared carefully to hold such powerful magic." As she worked through the night, weaving spells into each ring, Vali watched with his enhanced senses. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't quite place it. Then, as she completed the final enchantments, he saw it. Additional layers of magic being woven specifically into 2 rings, his and Niklaus's. "Wait," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Those rings are different from the others." Iana's hand stilled for just a moment. "Of course they are," she replied smoothly. "You and Niklaus are more unique than the others. The protection must be different as well." "No." Vala's black pools met hers. "I can recognize those patterns. They're familiar to the ones on Nick's necklace. That's not protection you're weaving. It's binding magic." The warmth dropped from Iana's face. "Clever boy," she said, her voice hardening. "Esther's spirit warned me you'd be difficult to contain." The air in the room grew heavy with tension as Iana's facade crumbled away. Her fingers curled into claws as she began drawing power from the earth itself. "Your mother and I prepared for this," she said, her voice taking on an otherworldly echo as spirits began manifesting around her. "She speaks to me from beyond, warning me of what you've truly become." Suddenly, a magical barrier shimmered into existence, revealing what had been hidden. Tatia, bound to an altar, blood already trickling from cuts on her arms into ceremonial bowls. "Tatia!" Vala snarled, the mark on his arm flaring crimson as rage coursed through him. "The blood of the Petrova line has power," Iana declared, beginning her true spell. "Power enough to unmake what should never have been." The air crackled with devastating force as her spell took hold, empowered by Tatia's blood and Esther's guidance from beyond. Michael and the other brothers fell to their knees, gasping in pain as the magic attempted to unmake them. But Vali remained standing, the mark on his arm blazing against the onslaught. "You cannot unmake what nature itself fears to touch," he growled, stepping forward through the magical storm. The jawbone blade hummed with dark energy in his grip. "Stay back," Iana commanded, but her voice trembled as she saw her magic had no effect on him. "The spirits protect me, look around you," which Vala's laugh was cold as he advanced. "They're fleeing from what I am." Indeed, the ancestral spirits were dissipating, retreating from the darkness emanating from his mark. For the first time, true fear crept into Iana's eyes. Iana began chanting in ancient tongues, her desperation making the very air crackle with power. The ceremonial bowls containing Tatia's blood began to glow with an unnatural light. Esther warned me what you truly are, she spat, her voice distorting with channeled magic. A demon wearing the skin of a man. The mark of death itself. Then you should have listened more carefully, Vali replied coldly, continuing his advance. Death cannot be unmade. The jawbone blade cut through her magical barriers like they were mist. Ayana's eyes widened as she realized the true extent of what she faced. In desperation, she reached for more power, drawing so deeply from the earth that the ground beneath them began to tremble. By nature's law, I bind you, she began, but Vali moved faster than thought. His hand closed around her throat, lifting her from the ground. Nature's laws? He asked quietly, his black eyes boring into hers. You think they can protect you from what I am now? But before he could strike, Tatia's weak voice cut through the chaos. Vali, please. Her voice brought him back, out of his blinding rage. It was something peculiar about her. At first, he only became interested in her because of her own darkness, but what kept him was her light. As he calmed down some more, Vali realized what he was about to do wasn't the best course of action. He could have killed her easily. The jawbone blade thirsted for her blood, and his rage at what she'd done to Tatia demanded vengeance. But beneath his fury, Tatia aided the awakening of the carefully laid, cold, calculated part of him. Ayana was powerful, respected, and most importantly, connected to every witch coven in the region. Her death would spark a war with the witch community that his family wasn't ready to face, not when they were still learning the extent of their new powers. More than that, a living Ayana would serve as a warning to other witches. Her defeat, her humiliation at being powerless against him, would spread through whispered conversations and fearful warnings. Let her live to tell the tale of the creature her magic couldn't touch, the monster that even ancestral spirits fled from. Her survival would become a testament to his power, far more effective than her death could ever be. Besides, he knew from his memories of another life just how valuable a witch's fear could be. Sometimes, mercy could be more terrifying than death, especially when that mercy came from something they couldn't understand or control. He turned his gaze to focus and see Tatia's pale face, blood still flowing from her wounds. The sight of her suffering made his rage surge higher, but her voice, his control over himself, held him back from delivering the killing blow. Instead, he brought Ayana's face close to his. Remember this night, he growled, his voice carrying a demonic tone. Remember what happened when you dared to touch what's mine. Live with the knowledge that your magic means nothing against what I've become. He threw her aside and moved to Tatia, his enhanced senses telling him she was fading fast. The mark pulsed on his arm as memories from his past life surfaced. He knew how to save her, how to make her like them. His blood would give her new life. Kneeling beside her, he gently cradled her head. The ritual had weakened her severely, but her eyes still held that fierce spark he'd always admired. Even bound and bleeding, she maintained her dignity. I know what they've become, she whispered, her voice faint but steady. Ayana had told her everything while binding her, trying to justify her actions with twisted explanations of natural balance and necessary evil. What you've become. Yes, Vali replied softly, his demonic black eyes flicking back to their human ones, meeting hers with softness not normally expected of him. And now you have a choice to make. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle despite the darkness radiating from him. Death or eternal life? With you? Tatia asked, a slight smile playing at her bloodied lips. Even now, she showed no fear of what he'd become. Vala nodded, her smile widened slightly, that familiar determination shining through her pain. Always with you, she breathed, the words carrying the weight of an eternal promise. Without hesitation, Vala bit into his wrist, letting his blood flow freely. The mark pulsed as he brought his bleeding wrist to her lips, knowing exactly what needed to happen next. Death, then transformation. His siblings watched in confusion, not yet understanding this aspect of their new existence. Tatia's eyes fluttered closed as she drank, her strength already fading. The blood loss from Iona's ritual had weakened her significantly, but Vali could feel her heart still beating, growing slower with each passing moment. "What are you doing?" Elijah asked, his voice uncertain. "Saving her," Vali replied simply, cradling Tatia's head as her breathing grew shallow. "The only way I can now." Her heart gave one final, weak flutter before stopping completely. The silence that followed was deafening. "You killed her," Finn whispered in horror. "No," Valis said, his black eyes never leaving Tatia's face. "I've given her a choice. Now we wait." Iona watched from her position on the floor, her expression a mixture of fear and fascination. She understood now what was happening, the first turning of a human into their kind, the birth of something new. "The spirits whisper of what you're doing," she said quietly. "This is an abomination against nature." "Nature," Vali replied coldly, "has no say in what we are anymore." They waited in tense silence as the minutes stretched on. Then, suddenly, Tatia's eyes snapped open, gasping for air as new life flooded through her veins. Her gaze met Vali's, and for a moment, everything else ceased to exist. "Welcome to eternity," he whispered, helping her sit up.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.